All right, I have the time. I apologize. It's 6:07, so I'm going to go ahead and call this special meeting to order at 6:08. If you could please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Heaston, if you could please take the roll.
Good evening, everyone. Mrs. Reed.
Here.
Mr. Stubbs.
Here.
Mr. Raymert.
I'm here virtually.
Thank you. This is a special meeting of the German Township Trustees. There are 4 purposes for tonight's special meeting. Number 1, for the Township Trustees to meet with representatives from the City of Germantown, the Village of Farmersville, and Jackson Township to discuss a proposed Joint Economic Development District, a JEDD, at the southwest corner of Manning Road and Germantown Farmersville Pike on land owned by the Valley View School District. The second purpose of the meeting is to discuss and/or approve the use of funds received under the CARES Act for coronavirus relief. The third purpose, to approve a resolution authorizing the advance of tax dollars collected for tax year 2020 in 2021. And the fourth purpose is to discuss and/or vote for a candidate for Preble County Farm Service Agency Committee. And before we go forward with the meeting, I would like to discuss the previous special meeting on October 10th when we discussed the JEDD that evening. Shortly after that meeting, there was a lot of activity on the internet talking about whether or not that was a legal meeting. So I wanted to address that specific issue. And when we try to determine what is a legal public meeting, we go to the Ohio Revised Code. Section 121.22, subsection F states, a public body shall not hold a special meeting unless it gives at least 24 hours advance notice to the news media that have requested notification, except in the event of an emergency requiring immediate action. And also goes on to say that anyone upon request can receive notification of all meetings on the public business to be discussed. The October 10th special meeting was noticed to the Germantown Press and to those people who have requested notification of all German Township trustee meetings on Friday, October 9th at 10:58 a.m. So that was in excess of the 24 hours notice. And that would make the meeting a legal meeting. If anyone would like to be added to the list of people who receive notice of all German Township trustee meetings, they can either call the township office and leave that information for me, or they can email me at gtwpfiscalofficer@woh.rr.com. Now, in addition to that meeting, tonight's meeting is also a legal meeting. The notice of that was sent to the Germantown Press and to those people who requested prior notice this past Sunday, November 15th at 9:52 p.m., well in excess of the 24-hour requirement. So both meetings are indeed public and legal meetings. Thank you very much, Mrs. Reed.
Great, thank you. We do have representatives here from, well, both online. I believe we have a representative here for Germantown. We have someone from Jackson Township, and then someone from Farmersville as well. So they will be, hopefully this will be a discussion that we have that we can kind of work out some of the kinks or questions, concerns that we have about the JEDD. I believe the attorney is on as well as Mr. Richards, the superintendent. So at this time, I'll just open it up kind of for discussion from, well, actually, I guess I need to wait a minute. Visitor comments I have on the agenda as the next item. So do we have visitor I guess, questions or comments prior to starting the discussion?
I'll watch the chat as well.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to go ahead.
All right, I believe everyone that Mrs. Sewell muted has muted again, and I don't see anyone. I see someone commenting that they would like discussion until there has, I'm sorry, they would like to reserve time until there has been discussion. So it doesn't appear that people have questions or comments prior to the discussion. I didn't know if they had any questions after our meeting from last time. So we can touch base after the different municipalities, jurisdictions, touch base and talk about the JEDD. So at this time, I'm going to open it up to, I know last time we had a pretty good conversation, so I'm going to open it up to the different jurisdictions and anyone that would like to come forward with questions or comments.
I'll go ahead and start, Abra. This is Brian Lofsick, City of Germantown. Just for an overview, I know all the representatives received this, but the attorney that is working the JEDD sent us all a response to a lot of the questions that were brought up from our last meeting. So I'd like to just run through those very quickly so everybody's kind of on the same baseline as we go forward. So first of all, there was a lot of discussion last time on the purpose of the JEDD and whether this particular purpose is actually legal. So her response was that the statute says the JEDD is for economic development. And yes, this is not a typical development circumstance, but the statute does not specifically define economic development, nor does it impose any specific development requirements. Let's see, the second question, could providing a resource officer count as a contribution? And her response is yes, as mentioned. That would be an enhanced service that is not normally required or provided. German Township could use it as their contribution if they paid for all portion of the cost. All four of the municipalities and townships could count it as their contribution if they each agree to pay a specific dollar amount towards the salary each year for a specific period of time, or a specific percentage of the cost for a period of time. The amount paid could be equal, but does not have to be. Let's see. We had a discussion about what rate in terms of income tax we would impose. Obviously, the maximum rate that we can is the maximum rate of an entity in the JEDD, which would be Germantown's at 1.5. But her answer is the JEDD does not have to levy the income tax at the maximum rate permitted. Yes, the tax rate can change over time. You could set the parameters for the change in rate at the time the tax is first levied. Otherwise, the JEDD board would have to vote to change it later. There was a question on the credit applied to whether or not Germantown or Farmersville could apply a credit to just the employees that worked in the JEDD. So if they happen to work in the JEDD and live in Germantown or Farmersville, they would end up paying a slight percentage higher. A very similar scenario, you know, if they worked in the JEDD or lived in really any city. So her response, you cannot have a different credit rate applied to only the JEDD taxpayers than applies to the rest of Germantown or Farmersville residents. The tax credit for taxes paid to another municipality, including the JED by statute, must be uniform as it is to everyone. Fifth question, what would residents be voting on? She says, as someone mentioned, there are public hearings required and the full complete JED agreement must be finalized and available prior to the public hearings during which the specifics of the agreement are discussed. On the actual ballot is the question of approving the JED agreement between the named parties. The specifics of the agreement as to the rate of income tax and percentage split are not actually part of the ballot language. So this would be a case where if we didn't have a unanimous, and this is my commentary, if we didn't have a unanimous approval at one of the townships, the JED would actually go onto the ballot. So it would be the specific JED agreement that would go to the ballot. Number 6, there was a comment made, the school has not asked for or approved the JED. So her response is, the school district, as a property owner and potentially ongoing business on the property, must sign a petition consenting to the JED. The superintendent or the board president would be the signatory on the petition, but the full board would have to approve it before the petition could be executed. The petition has not been submitted to the school board for their approval since the JED agreement has not been finalized. The school board must know the terms of the JED they're approving before they can approve it. We are not far enough along with the specific terms of the agreement to present a petition to the school board for their approval. And the last comment, we had a discussion on the potential for 2 JEDs. I think the proposal was set up kind of a 5-year JED now and then work to set up a second JED to follow the first one. Yeah, commentary was very unusual, not impossible, but more complicated. You can't have 2 JEDs on the same property at the same time, so the first JED would have to expire before you could put the second JED on. You would have to go through the same process a second time. As someone mentioned, the JED statutes could change. In a clarification, the previous statutes required to approve the JED. County approval is no longer required. The previous statutes also permitted the county to be a party to the JED and get a share of the income tax, but did not require them to be a party. So that was kind of her summary of all the questions, just so everybody is on the same page. Like I said, this was sent out to each of the representatives, but I want to make sure everybody that was listening in, that was here last time, gets the same information that we all have.
I appreciate you reading that. I read it shortly after the meeting, but I think having it fresh. Since Mr. Richards is on, I have a question I'm hoping you can assist me with. I have not attended the school board meetings. They actually are the same time as ours. I've watched bits and pieces of them. I'm just wondering, timeline-wise, kind of what is the timeline for school breaking ground? You know, what is your guys' timeline right now?
There we go. You'd think I'd do enough of these Zoom meetings that I should be a little bit better at this, at the technology. Thank you for having me. The timeline right now, there is some flexibility to it. We are waiting for final approvals of a few different things, but the tentative, and I say that in the year of 2020, I hesitate to say if everything goes well while we are in the year of 2020, but if everything goes well, the intent would be that we would, in January, February, start the design and schematic portion of the project, finalize that late spring, early summer, and then late summer, early fall, do what's called construction pad work. That's basically moving the dirt around to get ready for construction with the elevation changes, things of that nature. Finish up the site pad work by the end of 21, December 21. And when the ground thaws in the spring of 22, whenever that is, because we're in Ohio and we never know when that's going to be, then we would actually begin construction work at that time. So that's the estimated timeline, if everything goes well. So take that for what it's worth.
While I have you on, the school, there was some discussion that Mr. Wassick just mentioned about the school not, I guess, accepting or whatever you want to call it with the JED. how does, I guess from your perspective, I think you've had some discussions with the school board about it, feel about the JED?
We've been very supportive of that from the onset. We as a school board, we have not obviously had an official vote for the reasons that I think Mr. Wofsig just enumerated. But in talking to each board member, I will tell you there is a strong appetite to do this because we know honestly it's good for our entire community, and so we understand that there are going to be some employees that probably have to pay some more in taxes as a result of that. But ultimately, having new facilities, our voters have largely approved new school facilities for our students, and we want to be able to get going on that. We understand that by moving out of Farmersville and Germantown, what that does to those entities, and we understand that it places some additional burdens on German Township specifically. And it seems like from the bits that I've gathered is that a JED goes a long way in resolving all of those. And as a result of that, we know we want something that's good for our kids, but we want to be good community partners as well with everybody that's on this screen. So I will tell you, I believe there is very strong support for it. I don't anticipate any problems with that. As Mr. Wofsig said, that takes 5 board members, but I have not heard any concern from any of the board members about proceeding with a JED.
Okay, thank you. That was my 2 big questions for you, really. So I don't know if anybody else has questions or anything for him, or if there's anything else, Mr. Richards, that you would like to share. I don't want to keep you here all night, but by all means, I want to be able to have people ask you questions if they have them.
So I mean that's the timeline. Is kind of the timeline. Like I said, it's subjective, obviously, based upon weather, timing, supplies, all the other stuff. But I will say I personally as well am supportive of the JED, and I know a lot of our constituents are supportive. When I say constituents, I mean our board members as well. So if anybody has any other questions for me from the school end of it, Mr. Heastan, with all due respect to you, I'm not going to talk about the strategic plan for the district anymore. I think he's heard that presentation 5 times now. That makes him a trooper. So thank you, Mr. Heastan. I appreciate you hanging strong with me there. So, but if there's any questions that I can answer about this construction project or the JED, I'd be happy to answer any of those.
I do have a question for you.
Are you muted? You mentioned the board, that they're in favor of a JED. You briefly mentioned the teachers. What is the talk? Obviously, we're in a small community and everybody's talking about it. What is the consensus? Do you know from the teachers?
So I think it's like a lot of places. Most of our teachers, as you all well know, the people that are working at the intermediate and primary and the junior high are already paying a tax. So the only people not paying the tax are people, if I've understood it correctly, and there's some people smarter than me on this call, are people who work at the high school and who live in a township. Because if they work at the high school, but they live in either Farmersville or Germantown, they're already paying an income tax. So it only applies to them. It's a small group of people. I've talked with a small number of them. It's a small group anyway. Their kind of logic is this: you're never going to hear them come out and go woohoo. I don't think you're going to ever find anybody that says, I like being taxed. Please, sir, can I have some more? But they also know that they haven't been paying a tax for however many years they've been working there, whereas their other colleagues have been paying an income tax. And I will tell you, they also know that if this is what's good for our district and for our community, they're not going to jump up and down saying woohoo. We get to pay an income tax, but they also understand fairness. They're teachers and educators. They understand the notion of fairness. Just because they happen to work at a building that is in a township and they potentially live in a township, they understand that they're having an advantage right now that other people don't have. I don't think you're going to hear anybody saying anything positive, but I will also say I think the statement is in the silence. They're silent about it because they know what's best. That would be my take in talking to them. Does that answer your question, Mr. Lamb?
I'd like to throw in a question if I could, please. This is Mark Keener, 7865 Jamaica Road.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Richards, you say that it's only a small number of people that this affects, but I'm going to take issue with this. I'm still waiting, obviously, on public records that I've requested, but really the only people who will not be paying an additional tax are the people that are working at the elementary school or within the city of Germantown currently and are living in a tax or a non-taxing township. Every other employee, based on my, little bit of knowledge of local income tax law within the state of Ohio, every other employee is going to be paying a higher rate of tax. And so have you, and I'm happy to work with you and your treasurer to help you figure out which individual employees and how much they're going to do. Even if part of what I requested can't be provided to me, I'm happy to work with Laura. But I think you have an obligation to your employees to say, you, Mr. Gym Teacher, this JED is going to cost you $462 additional out of your paycheck every year, and get a feedback from them. So their silence, I don't think is complicity with going along with the JED. I think there's a good chance their silence is because they have no idea how much this is going to cost them.
Okay, and like I said, I'm not gonna. You're right. Talking to Ms. Sauber is probably a better handle of that. She deals with the finances of all of that, and I'm not a tax expert, nor will I even pretend to be one on a Zoom call. I will say though, I think there's a mentality amongst a majority of the staff that this is having something positive for our community. We as employees have recognized, and many conversations that I've had with employees, that facilities were very much needed. And in my conversations with many employees, and you're right, I have not done a vote or anything of that nature, but in the conversations that I've had, they've recognized that if there's a contribution that has to be made by them in order to be able to get something better for kids, in the standard of what I think is true of most educators will do what's necessary to make sure that our kids are provided for. So there's not been a survey or a standard issued. Those are my casual conversations that I've had with a number of employees throughout this time. And yet again, I go back and say I believe the board is very supportive of the notion of a JED as well. As Mr. Wofsig pointed out, we haven't seen particulars because we don't know what those are. But yet again, we are comfortable with the concept of a JED. And obviously the particulars would have to be worked out by a lot of the fine people that are on the screen.
Okay, well, you used the word fairness several times during your discussion, and I think in all fairness to your employees, you need to let them know
Mr. Keener,
how much it's going to cost. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Keener, can you please raise your hand or go in the chat feature so that we can do this in an orderly fashion, please? Because there was other people that had questions prior to you that is doing going in the chat box.
I wasn't aware that we were supposed to go into the chat box, Mrs. Reed, so I humbly apologize. I was just following up on my previous questions and comments with Mr. Richards.
That's fine. After this question, if you could please go in the chat box or raise your hand so that we can just go about this, because other people are waiting. You have legitimate questions, and I think they need to be answered just so that we can do it kind of in a more orderly fashion.
I sincerely apologize. I will remute myself.
So I'll simply say, Mr. Keener, if it's okay, Mrs. Reed, for me just to respond to that last part. Once we have details to be able to take to our employees, I think that's a fair proposal of what you talked about. But at this time, we don't have anything to take to them. So I'm not opposed to that thought process that you have, Mr. Keener.
Okay, thank you.
The two questions, well, there might be more than two. The questions that I'm seeing over here in the chat was the one was for you specifically. Has hiring a resource officer been discussed with the board?
No, that's not a topic that we've had. I am supportive of the notion of an SRO. In fact, when I was first hired here, that was something I kind of took a look at. However, I will also say that I've realized upon being here, we are very blessed with the 3 different police departments that we do have that our district is a part of. It's very common to see Germantown police at our elementaries, German Township at the high school, and Jackson Township at the junior high, just there amongst the kids, not even when they've been called to be there. So that's something that I continue to be very thankful to all of those entities that they choose, and they don't have to do that. And I've been other places where it doesn't happen, but they choose to spend their, I guess, downtime or time when they're not on a call at our schools, which I'm very, very thankful for. So, yes.
Okay, so it looks like she has a follow-up question to that, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you that. I don't know if you can see the chat box over there.
Okay, let me take a look.
It says, so a resource officer is not needed.
I don't know about that. I go, needed is and I don't know who the person is, but I appreciate the word choice as an English teacher. Needed is I'm going to get stuck on the word needed. I will tell you, would I like one? Absolutely. I think having an SRO, a singular person, especially as we go to a single campus, but a one person that our kids can form positive relationships with, gets to know our kids and stuff. I think that's great. Would I like it? Sure. Is it needed? I don't know, but on the same token, I don't know how this is going to play out with a single campus. That's an unknown variable, but making sure our kids are safe is obviously a paramount interest to me. I have, for people on here that don't know, I have 2 kids of my own in the district, so making student safety is a high priority for me.
One of their other questions also is how many employees will be affected by the JEDD? I don't know if you happen to know that offhand or not.
Well, affected, so I'm not sure if I can say affected by the JEDD. I mean, if the question is just how many employees do we have, that one I can answer. We have roughly 200 employees. That's classified and certified. Affected by the JEDD, that is not something that I'm able to answer. Like I said, we haven't gotten that far with that.
I guess I'll hop in right there. And I don't see any other questions right now, Mrs. Reed, to answer ahead of that. But I listened to Mr. Keener's remarks, and I totally understand and agree where he's coming from. I think it's dependent upon what the tax rate is to determine, who is getting incrementally taxed. Because if we did a 1%, it wouldn't be just Germantown. Farmersville employees also wouldn't be getting an increase, and that is then 2/3 of the total school employees. As you mentioned, it's about 200 employees, both classified and unclassified. I thought it was slightly under that, but let's just say it is 200 employees against the thousands and thousands of people in our jurisdiction. So that's where I get a little bit confused as to this discussion going down a rabbit hole about 200 employees. I think what we should be discussing is when the schools move, what's the impact to each one of these jurisdictions? How much revenue are they going to lose? And what do they have to do to replace that? If it's cut programs, then that's fine. We need to put that in front of the public. But it seems like we're getting way too caught up on whether we tax 200 people or we try to recover the services that we may end up losing for our thousands and thousands of constituents. So that's where I would like to focus the discussion for Germantown and Farmersville is, are you guys going to have to cut services because you lose this revenue if we do not put a JEDD in place? And for Germantown particularly, which is what I'm looking in German Township, what I'm looking to represent is, are we going to incur additional costs for the school moving to that site? And if so, how do we replace that revenue or gain revenue to cover those costs? Because at the end of the day, it's not a great thing for the school employees to pay tax, but if 200 people pay tax and most of them already are paying tax today, and that takes the burden off of thousands and thousands of people in our jurisdictions, I think that's the discussion we should be having.
I don't know if Germantown or Farmersville wants to jump in there because you mentioned would they have to be cutting services? Maybe they can give a better idea.
I'll jump in first. I don't know if you have to do anything with volume. Okay. So I'll just be short and sweet. We will incur additional costs. To be transparent, not exactly sure what that amount is, but additional maintenance service on a lift station and some, just additional wear and tear on that line that we have going out there now. We will also lose our existing tax income. The intermediate school is our largest, or I'm sorry, the junior high school is our largest employer. So that will be our loss. Just to put it out there, do we need to cut programs? Do we need to cut anything that we do right now? Farmersville is a small community. Don't necessarily know that we need to cut anything. We haven't had that hypothetical conversation at this point. I guess it's not hypothetical anymore because the school will be going to a new location, but it is not something we've gone in much detail with numbers yet. I know that Germantown will take a lot bigger hit with this move than we will, so I will turn that over to Brian.
Yeah, this is Brian. So obviously, kind of a similar boat for Farmersville, right? This is one of, if not the largest employer in the city here. So we're looking at a loss of revenue. It's fluctuated, at least the years that I've seen, but anywhere between, I think it's around $74,000 up to as high as maybe $90,000. So obviously, yes, that will hurt. So the cuts will have to come somewhere. And we haven't gotten into that kind of planning phase yet because we're hoping this is a potential path to soften that blow at least. But anytime you take out that kind of revenue on an annual basis, something gets cut somewhere. So absolutely, there will be losses. From what or where or what that impact is, we don't know yet. So to one more item, just to tag on to the mayor's comment, there are going to be some additional costs for Germantown as well. Again, hard to quantify. We'll be adding the school that's in Farmersville currently to our fire district out there. So we will be providing fire EMS services to the single site facility. So there will be some added costs there. Now what that is, I have no idea. I don't know what the call volume is to the schools right now, but there will be something there.
So it sounds like we don't have it completely detailed out, but I think the point is there will be lost revenue that one batch of people had been supplying to the districts, and we would be proposing a tax on that same exact batch of people to maintain that revenue to cover any costs that would be incurred with this new site. And so the question, I think, is if we didn't do the tax, which kept their tax base the same as today virtually, it's not as if it's a new tax for everyone. The high school, if people aren't aware, the high school has less income or less teacher salaries than just Germantown alone, elementary, let alone Germantown and Farmersville. So the people that are getting a new tax are, a very small portion of people in this group. And so it's basically you're taking the same tax base that is getting taxed today and taxing them in a different jurisdiction tomorrow. So I understand there's some concern there, absolutely. But I think the bigger question is, if we don't do this, what's the implications? Long term, if there's additional costs that all the municipalities have to incur, or at least 3 of the municipalities have to incur, does it make sense to pass by this opportunity and then have to go to the ballot or cut services on your entire constituent base?
So Mr. Richards said Valley View has 200 employees about. By my count, somewhere between 50 and 60 of those employees live in the city of Germantown. So those 50 to 60 people will be paying an additional tax just right off the top. And of that, that throws Brian's numbers for the city of Germantown off just a little bit. 200 employees, if I counted right, 50 to 60, let's just say 25% means the 74,000 to 90,000 number is at least 25% off in revenue that they're actually going to lose, because those Germantown residents are going to pay the income tax regardless of where the building, or if there's a JEDD in place, or if the schools were at the JEDD. But they will pay an additional tax. Over 50 employees will pay an additional tax because of the Germantown income tax credit reduction.
Yeah, so that's a good point. They will pay, instead of paying to Germantown the full 1.5%, they'll pay to the JEDD the full 1.5%, if we go with 1.5%. And then in addition to that, so Germantown, because they live here, Germantown gives a 60% credit. So they will still be paying a portion to Germantown, a much smaller portion than we had before. And it's very similar, for Mrs. Reed, who, where you work, Miamisburg, I think. Miamisburg's is 1 3/4. So you pay that to Miamisburg. Germantown gives you a 60% credit of our 1.5, and then you pay the remainder. So your total, you're at like almost 2.5 working in Miamisburg. Very common, but Mr. Stubbs is right. There is some unknown out there as far as where the employees at this time live and what they currently pay and where they currently work. That's a math equation that's probably above my pay grade right now. But I think that's why this, as we've gone through several of these meetings, we've said we can be flexible. There's flexibility here. The frequently asked questions that we sent out a while back had some initial numbers in there, but it was not anything that was set in stone, and for that very reason.
There's a question or comment over on the side. I would like to touch base, and feel free, any of you guys, to touch base on it as well. It says, why should a resident of German Township that works in the township have to pay to support Germantown? My understanding, and Mr. Wofsik, since this deals with Germantown, please feel free to jump in. My understanding is that Germantown and Farmersville's hope is to make up their lost revenue. So I'm going to call it extra, what is left over once Germantown and Farmersville are made whole, then would be divided up amongst Jackson Township and German Township. So the resident that is being asked about would not necessarily be supporting Germantown. If Germantown is only, and Farmersville is wanting to be made whole, they would, in theory, only be getting the same amount, I guess, that they were getting before, and the leftover remaining money would then go to German Township or Jackson Township. If I did not answer that correctly, please feel free to jump in and correct that.
No, I think that was a good summary. So one of the items we talked about at our last meeting was what happens to this revenue that would be collected from the high school employees during construction. So if the JEDD were in place, but we don't, we still have our buildings in Germantown and Farmersville, where is the money that will be taxed against those teachers at the high school? Where will that money go? And I think we've all sort of agreed that's not anything that we currently see, other than, as in Mr. Stubbs' example, if they live here and we give them some kind of credit, we might see some of that. But as far as the total number, the big number, we don't see any of that. So that would be reserved for the township. So I think the way you put it, Ms. Reed, is a good way to say it. If they currently work in the township, theoretically, as we've laid this out so far, that money actually wouldn't be coming back to Germantown. That would be staying with German or Jackson Township.
And I just want to touch base on something that I have seen on social media. And so I know the attorney is on here as well, so maybe she can chime in. I don't know if she's able to talk this time, but maybe go in the chat or something. there has been discussion about, let's say we pass the JED, everything is 100%, schools in the JED, that then we start adding homes or various people into a JED. We cannot just add homes and add people into a JED. That is not something that can be done. As we discussed in the beginning, the school has to, or the entity would actually have to apply, and it has to go through this same process that it would go through now and has to go before a public hearing. It is a very lengthy process that we cannot just do. So I don't want, I just wanted to clear that up because I had seen that out there. So I don't know if Brenda wants to touch base on that at all, just for some clarification, or anyone else for that matter.
Can you guys manually unmute her? I don't know if it's, because I think she's dialed in from her phone, so she can't use the chat.
Yes, Mrs. Sewell is requesting to unmute her, so we'll see if it works. She looks unmuted right now to me, so hopefully.
Abra, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Oh, good. So this is Brenda Weimer, and yes, you're correct, Abra. The process to add additional property to the JED is extensive, and it goes through the same process that creating the JED does, and you need a petition by the property owners. In this particular instance, I believe that we're including school district property, but a large portion of that is currently planned to be undeveloped in the near future. And so it's possible that that undeveloped school property that's included could be developed as homes in the future, and they would be in the JED. The current version of the JED agreement that has been requested by the parties contains language that says the income tax would not be applied to any residential property that is located in the JED. The parties were very intentional about prohibiting a residential income tax and only having it apply to employees within the JED. The former JED statutes didn't really permit those kinds of distinctions, but the current amended JED statutes allow you to make those kinds of distinctions.
I did not realize I was muted for that. I'm sorry. While you were unmuted when I started, the question's been asked, who is retaining the JED attorney and is she representing all entities? I think that is a fluid discussion, but I will let, I don't know if Brenda wants to answer that, or if you need to answer it to the best of my knowledge.
So I've been retained by Germantown, and they are paying my fee. German Township is being represented by the prosecutor's office, and I'm going to forget his name. Was it Nick, maybe? I can't remember who.
Nathaniel.
Nathaniel. We spoke a while ago, and I have his contact information in the file. When we get a draft of the agreement ready to circulate, he will be included in its distribution because he's on point to review for German Township. And I assume he or someone else in his office would also be representing Jackson Township. And I don't know what is going on with Farmersville right now. There have been no discussions, as far as I know, about that representation in particular.
I know that there has been some discussion too, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brenda, that contributing to the attorney's fees can be listed as the contribution to the JED. There has been some discussion, is that what, more than just Germantown? My original understanding, and Mr. Wapsick, feel free to jump in again, is that Germantown was paying a set fee, if you will. And then after that, kind of looking and seeing does other people want to help with these fees? And that could be a JED contribution, because every entity has to make a JED contribution.
Right, and then that has been discussed as one of the options to help Germantown with the initial legal fees for getting the documents drafted and going through all of the legal issues for the JED, but no decisions have been made.
Right, Abra. One of the very first meetings we had earlier this year, I think that was one of the discussions. You know, everyone needs to come up with a contribution. What is it going to be? One of the ways to solve that equitably would be to basically split the legal fees amongst the entities, so that everyone does contribute. Everybody contributes the same amount, and it's kind of a shared asset, I guess.
I also want to say that I guess when I think of who is representing, you know, someone I know, like in a divorce, if you're being represented by an attorney, you're kind of against the other party. My feeling is that this is a totally different ballgame. It's not like the JED attorney is representing Germantown. This is my personal feeling as representing Germantown, and I don't want to say is out against the other parties. I really believe this is a collective thing that trying to do as a group as a whole.
Abra, this is Brenda. I would agree. In this case, right, we're not pitting one party against another. We've been engaged not to advocate for Germantown over anybody else, but to draft the documents and to assist with answering the legal questions to make sure everybody understands what's going on and to answer legal questions from everybody. And then when the document is finally drafted, each party will then have it reviewed before they sign off on it, just to make sure that everything is as everybody expected.
Perfect. I think that I believe that answered the question. If it did not, please feel free to add a question in the chat box. Yeah, there is another question. It says, can JEDs be formed to recover lost revenue? And I would refer that to Brenda.
Well, I mean, the statute doesn't say that. It says for economic development, and typically JEDs are thought of as creating additional revenue streams. But these are, as we've discussed previously, very unusual and interesting circumstances. So the statute doesn't address that one way or another. It seeks to provide a means for creating additional revenue streams, so to speak, to provide for services and improvements as a result of new development.
And then, Brenda, this is Brian. This isn't the first time this has been done, correct? I think we talked about a couple other examples with schools kind of in a somewhat similar situation around the state having done this.
JEDs around the state have been done for a variety of reasons, and you know, in many cases, they may have been also used when schools have relocated. But you know, you could ask the same question: what's economic development? I know of several instances where townships have created JEDs for existing businesses, and so you ask the question, you know, what is economic development? Some could argue, well, if you're just creating a JED on properties that already have existing businesses and existing, you know, employees, you know, is that really economic development when you're not creating anything new? All those businesses already exist, and yet that is done, you know, repeatedly throughout the state in the formation of JEDs within townships. So there is no, you know, what is always done, what is never done. There's a variety of circumstances for which JEDs have been used throughout the state, and all of them somewhat unique in their own way.
So there's a kind of a follow-up question, if you will. Is this JED on solid legal ground?
Yes.
The other thing I would mention on top of that is, although we keep talking about the revenues lost and replacing that, and that would absolutely be something this JED would look to accomplish, there's going to be additional services that will have to go to that campus that the townships and municipalities will have to provide. I could foresee in the future German Township needing to do something with Weaver Road potentially, you know, and that hill there, and there only being a stop sign at Manning to make sure it's a safe intersection to get to the school with the initial traffic that's going to the high school site today. I think there's a lot of different things that we may have to incur with us in this JED. And so I think that's where, you know, I think that we need to think, what is the expenses we may have to incur with this move? And do we think it's right to tax the school, which is driving those expenses, or do we think it's right to tax the entire constituency? So I think that's where I keep driving is, you know, we focus a little bit on the 200 folks, but, you know, the school levy's been going on for several years, and these school employees have understood this probably better than most of the township residents because the tax would be on them. And I've talked to many of the teachers. And so again, as to Mr. Keener's point, I can't stand up here and say for all the behalf of all of them that they would all want tax, but I think we need to have a broader perspective and think about what's the long-term impact to all of our municipalities and not to one employer. If people don't feel like we're going to incur additional expenses, that's what I would like to hear. If people could say today, I don't think there'll be any additional services needed, any additional expenses incurred, because then for German Township, I would say there's no revenue really needed to be generated on our side because we're not having any additional expenses. However, that is not how I feel. I feel that there will be incremental expenses. Now, whether they're substantial or not, that can be debatable. But I think it makes sense to tax the folks that are driving that rather than taxing the entire municipality to make up for that expense.
I completely agree with you, Mr. Raymer. And I also want to say the things that I see German Township incurring are pretty common sense things. I mean, obviously, additional road crews out there, salting, doing different things to make sure safety of the drivers of the buses and whatnot out there. Obviously, police being out there, that's going to be something that's going to happen, even directing traffic, things like that. So German Township is going to incur just basic common sense, you know, additional expenses. So, I mean, from my point of view, unless I'm definitely missing something, Miss Brenda, there was one other question. I'm not sure if everyone can see it or not, but it says, is Ohio the only state that has JEDs? I'm not sure of that answer, so I'm hoping you can help.
Oh, I don't know. Honestly, I'm only licensed in Ohio. I honestly don't know whether other states have JEDs. Every state has a different taxing setup in terms of, you know, which states and which local jurisdictions within those states rely more on property taxes, more on income taxes. The taxing systems are different in every state. And so whether or not another state actually provides for JEDs, I don't know the answer to that question.
Sorry, I was a little sidetracked. I know Mr. Raymer's brought up a few times about going back to the funding. So I don't know if that's where we would like to go, or I know he's unmuted, so I'll let you take over.
Well, I think Mr. Wolfsig, you know, addressed a lot of the questions from last meeting. I went back to our minutes, and there was 3 that were jotted down in the minutes for follow-ups, and the only one I think we haven't addressed is we were saying we were going to give Mr. Stubbs a chance to come back with what he thought an equitable split would be. I think, you know, if we can talk through that and see if there's a long-term solution with a proposal from him on an equitable split, and if not, then we need to discuss whether we do a shorter period, like a five year that he's requested before. But I guess I don't see us making a lot of progress on this debate, especially when it gets down to the school employees. There's no one else getting pulled into the JED. They're the ones driving the cost. and have been paying the tax burden over the last decade or longer. And so that's something that wouldn't be changed. So I guess at this point, Mr. Stubbs, do you have, did you think about an equitable split or have a proposal on that?
I would definitely prefer the 5-year, or not 5-year, temporary construction only JED. But Brian said something earlier that was interesting. I thought he said everyone if we all contribute equal amounts to the legal fees, because that's an equal contribution. I think that it should be equal revenue for each entity as well. So I would suggest a 25% split after the resource officer is paid for. That's fair. Mr. Wofsig already mentioned fairness in the legal fees. I think fairness in the revenue would be 25% as well.
So
Mr. Stubbs, I'll ask, let me turn the volume on. I'm sorry, were you talking, Mr. Wofsig? We didn't have this.
I was just going to clarify. You're talking for specifically to a 5-year JED is what you were thinking. So this would be construction only costs as far as the equal split, correct?
I'm not going to put a time limit on it. I keep saying 5 years. I don't mean to. I mean construction only, however long it takes to start construction to the finished product.
Okay.
Recoup that revenue from the non-Valley View employees, and it gives everyone 5 years to plan on not having that revenue forever. Tax money is not guaranteed forever, or at least it shouldn't be. So while I agree that German Township will incur extra costs, if we have an SRO in place, that will alleviate a lot of it for us. So it gives everyone time to plan. I mean, I don't think we should balance basically at this point, the city of Germantown's budget on the backs of the 200 Valley View School employees.
So then we would work towards a follow-on then after the construction only JED. Is that kind of your thinking?
I'm sorry, we only caught the tail end of what you said. Can you repeat that again?
Are you talking to me? I'm sorry, Amber.
Yes, Mr. Wofsig.
There was a question, Mr. Stubbs. If he's talking a construction only JED, then we would, assuming we got that into place, we would then begin work, I don't know when, maybe immediately, on trying to figure out a follow-on JED then for long-term, or are you thinking 5 years or construction only and then done?
Construction only and then done.
Obviously, speaking for Germantown, that's not something we would be interested in. Not a 5-year only. You know, we can figure out this construction piece of it. But I think as we look at this, we are looking at this as a longer term, 20 to 30 year agreement here. So that's definitely where our interest is. Obviously, it's not just our decision. So I think it's going to be up to maybe some debate amongst the township trustees as far as, how you cover whatever, how you're going to cover a school resource officer if there isn't a JED in place 5 years from now.
So that was my question that I keep messing up when I mute and unmute, and I'm messing this up. So Mr. Stubbs, you've mentioned several times about the 5-year or just the construction only JED piece, but you've also mentioned wanting an SRO funded. 75%, I think, was your last percentage. I'm not sure where 75% comes from, but my question is, if the JED is only for the construction cost, there wouldn't be funding for SRO because there wouldn't be an SRO out there because there wouldn't be a school built if it's going to stop after construction.
The 75% is, am I on? I don't feel like I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay. The 75% comes from being in school approximately 9 months out of the year, which is 75% of the school year, or 75% of the year. So that's where the 75% came from. The other 25% of the officer would be paid for by German Township, because most likely it would be our officer anyway. So they would be a road officer for 3 months. They would be a school resource officer for the remaining portion of the year. Yes, for the JED to go through, I think that a resource officer needs to be paid for at 75%, and that being the purpose of the JED. Currently, we don't have a purpose for this JED. I mean, we've talked a little bit about redistributing the taxes, but there's no actual purpose. So if you want to give this JED a purpose, paying for an SRO gives it a purpose. So I'm willing to do that long term, 75%, if 75% of the SRO's salary is paid for by the JED. But if it's not, I don't see the JED as having a legitimate point.
So
Mr. Richards is on here still, and I don't know if this is something he has any clue about, but I guess, Jake, I totally understand where you're coming from on the purpose piece versus just a replacement of lost revenues. But I haven't heard from anybody. I haven't seen a study done. I don't know if a study's coming at some point, but is there some kind of traffic study or anything to say that, at some point we need, 2 lanes or this, that, or the other, something that German Township might have to incur, and that could be something we could pay with the construction revenues and make a contribution to the school, just like as Farmersville, Mr. Lamb has said that, the lift pump, the lift station, that kind of stuff, if they paid for that cost versus the school reimbursing, that would be their contribution, and they could use the construction revenues to cover that upfront capital investment. So I guess that's another thing I would think about is, are there things that we can do that will prepare us to have the right traffic and infrastructures and utilities for the school site, but it gets paid basically out of the JED collection during the period of time of construction.
So the current high school and the building site is at the intersection of 2 county roads. So that doesn't involve German Township.
But I don't think it's just that. I think a lot of people have had concerns on Manning because all the traffic from Germantown now flowing up through Hickory Point to Weaver Road up to Manning. So Weaver, I think, is one of our township roads, correct? And there's already Hill there today. It's a dangerous intersection. We'd be putting a lot more traffic through that. But I don't know if there's a study in the phase of the construction that would say anything like this. That might not even be part of the school construction. But I guess that's something that I would love to hear from Jeremy's perspective, if that's something we should be looking at to make sure we have safe township roads there to support the school district.
I will say, Mr. Raymer, I reached out to the county engineers, it's been several months ago, to ask about the traffic study and things like that. Their answer to me, and Mr. Richards might know more, I don't know if they've done any of that. Several months ago, their answer to me was that you can't really do a traffic study if the traffic's not there yet. And that's up to the county, and people have to reach out to them. And it is not German Township. I thought it was us because the school was in German Township. The engineer that I spoke to, I believe that it needs to be the school that reaches out to them, or really the engineer who is designing the school or building the school, letting them know where the entrances are going to be, the exits, things of that nature. What do they anticipate as far as drop-off times, pickup times? They asked all of these questions that I'm not sure is really solidified yet for the district. Are they all going to be the same time? Things like that really are going to play a role in traffic light, whether it is needed or not. So.
Okay, I can just answer a little bit. I don't want to go out of turn. So with our bond issue, a traffic study is typically part of a bond issue to be conducted. I've talked to our architects who have built a ton of schools in the state of Ohio. Fanning and Howie, who we've used for pre-bond services, they said a traffic study will be done, and they said typically things will happen. They'll either make, and especially after today, we've all learned through COVID that there's a difference between requirements and recommendations. They believe that there would be some recommendations made, but they don't anticipate requirements being done simply because there's already a school there now. They said if there wasn't a school at that location now, there would probably be requirements. But because the school age drivers who are already there of grades 9 through 12 are already there. They would imagine, and they don't know what they are, but they would imagine that there would be recommendations. And that's from our pre-bond services construction attorney. They would imagine there would be recommendations, but not requirements.
This is Brian Wofsik. Just to backtrack a little bit, I want to make sure I heard Mr. Stubbs with regards to the SRO, and your comment was something about you would support a long-term, you're talking a long-term JED if the SRO salary of 75% of it came off the JED on top. So you would entertain a long-term 30-year JED if you knew that SRO salary or 75% of that SRO salary was coming off the top. Did I hear you right?
I don't like the idea of taxing the school employees, but if we're going to go forward with this, yes, 75% of the SRO needs to be paid for by the JED.
I do have a question about the 75%. Being a teacher contracts are for 185 days a year. So, I mean, if you think 180 days a year, that's half of a year. There's 365 days in the year. So that's, personally to me, sounds more like a 50% more than a 75%. That's why I was asking where the 75% came from for that. So.
I guess, is the SRO allowed to take off on weekends?
Well, yes, but someone that is not in the education system does work. I mean, I have 2 weeks off for Christmas break, spring break, fall break. The SRO would not be given, I wouldn't think, unless they would take that, he or she would take that as a vacation week. You know, and many employees, they give 1, 2, 3 weeks vacation. Other than that, you work your Monday through Friday, you know, 8 to 5 or whatever your shifts are, your 12-hour shifts, whatever they may be. And other things are vacation time. So if I'm just thinking 180 days, I mean, 52 weeks a year, you've got to kind of figure that out a little bit. I know the SROs in Miamisburg where I teach, if we're on spring break, they're being an officer for Miamisburg or Miami Township or wherever they're at. So I would assume that would be the same way here, just because this school is out, that officer would still be working for German Township as an officer.
So, hearing what Mr. Stubbs had to say, I guess I'll ask one question to the lawyer, and then I'll make my comment on where I think I sit at this point after, you know, a couple of discussions that we've had now. Brenda, my question to you is, could we, instead of paying 75% of the SRO, which is an arbitrary number, say that we're going to contribute back the first $50,000 of tax revenues collected in the JED every year to the school district? And that can be the contribution from each municipality that gives them an opportunity to decide if they want to put it towards an SRO or they can use it towards other services at the school. Because I think, you know, an SRO, that salary will change maybe at a disconnected amount from inflation on the tax revenues. And I just feel like that's a very arbitrary thing to lock into, especially when you're talking about a long-term JED. Could we make it a flat dollar amount?
So you can have the JED pay a flat dollar amount towards the resource officer on an annual basis, or if the individual entities want it to be their contribution to the JED, you could assign a flat dollar amount to each of the corresponding parties. So, you know, $17,000 per year. If we're doing on an equal basis, you know, will be paid by each of the 4 jurisdictions as their contribution to the JED, rather than taking it off the top of the JED. If you take it out of the total JED revenues while it's still with the JED before you get into the revenue distribution split, then it doesn't count as the contributions to the JED. It's just something the JED is paying for. So yes, in theory that works, but there'll be nuances in how that gets set up depending on whether it's counting as contributions or not.
I guess I would see it just as paying for the SRO. You would do it in the same order. You would pay for that. You're just giving a flat dollar rate for the contribution versus an SRO salary.
Right, because an amount of money towards it, because as you point out, yes, the SRO salary could keep going up. What happens if the SRO salary is more than the JEDD is bringing in total in a given year? And then you also have the issue of, we discussed not doing it necessarily into perpetuity because, what happens in 20 years when the school doesn't want or need a resource officer anymore because things have changed such that we can't envision right now. And that's not something that they need or want. So there are ways to handle that, but we have to be mindful of putting things into the agreement that will last forever if the parties don't really want them to.
Thank you. I think that's the point, right? Is no one knows what the future holds exactly on an SRO salary and those types of things. So I think a flat contribution would make more sense. But I guess where I'm at, I don't know if we need to keep having more of these discussions. I think we're making some progress, but I think fundamentally we're disconnected across the jurisdictions to some degree. So I guess where I'm at is I feel like if German Township does not feel that there'll be incremental costs incurred from the school moving and additional work or traffic things that we may have to incur in the future, then I don't have a strong need for the JEDD. I think where I'm at, though, is I believe there probably will be some incremental costs to some degree, and I know our budgets are tight, and I think it'll be irresponsible of us to pass this opportunity up and put the tax dollar expenses back on our broader constituents from this decision. So I would be in full support of either the 5-year construction only to make sure that we could make the implementations to, the hard cost investments to support the school if there's any road work or anything like that needed done. Or I would also go along with the long-term JEDD and paying a portion back to the school that they could use at their discretion, and that be the contribution. The split could still be worked out. Where I struggle a little bit on the long term is I think Mr. Sells makes a good point about revenues are not meant to always be the same and last into perpetuity. And so if we lose revenue in some other place, it's not like we're going to be able to create a JEDD somewhere else. This was a unique circumstances, and I think that's why it justifies it. But I also think that there's some reasons why we might not want to set this precedent of doing something like that. So I'm okay. I will support the broader community because at the end of the day, I think this is about our broad community and what's right for the broad community. I think if people thought broadly on this, I think we would see that the JEDD makes a lot of sense. That other people are not giving it credit and merit for. But I'm also understanding that it is unique and we're not using it exactly as the JEDD may have originally been intended 10 or 15 years ago when it came out.
There is a question, why is there a rush to institute a JEDD when there is no idea when construction will start and no building plans drawn? I believe Mr. Richards has touched on that a little bit. It sounds like to me, and please feel free to jump in, Mr. Richards, they are starting things as quickly as they can, but I'm going to turn it over to you and let you answer that.
So the construction timeline, once again, and I did say at the beginning, but maybe people weren't on, and that's fine. We are doing the design work here probably starting in January. We have a few other perfunctory things. There's a lot of things that have to happen behind the scenes to get a school construction project off the ground. It's very different than in the private sector of how things happen, and we know that. But what's going to happen is we are going to begin the design and schematic process. That's going to take up probably January, probably all the way to May or June. That's the anticipated thing. Yet again, with the preface of assuming all things happen the way they should. and that is a massive disclaimer with big blinking lights. The plan would be then we would start doing this. We'd have that finalized. So you referenced drawings and stuff like that. We'd have that finalized probably June thereabout, and then we would begin site pad work. And the site pad is to prepare the ground for construction to begin. That would take place late summer, conclude by no later than December of 21. As soon as the ground thaws in 22, we would begin construction work at that time. So that's yet again the timeline that we have from the school.
This is, I think, mainly a question for Brenda, the attorney. If the JED was in place now, would the engineers doing the planning, et cetera, be paying the tax? I don't believe, I'm going to let you take it.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Probably not, because they'll claim they're doing the work at their offices rather than on site. So some cities will try to push that issue when collecting income taxes as to whether or not a professional should be taxed for doing work for a particular jurisdiction, whether they're doing it in their offices or on the site of the project. But in most cases, they will say, you know, we're not on the site doing the engineering work. We're at our desk in our office in another location, and therefore the tax is not applicable to those types of professionals working off site. We've seen jurisdictions try to push that, but for the most part, the engineers would not normally be taxed by the JED.
Thank you, Brenda. Mr. Keener, your question, and I apologize, I just am not understanding it. Okay, so we think that you're meaning the tax rate for everyone has to be uniform. Thank you.
I'll jump in and talk or ask a question to Brenda just so I can kind of clarify it from writing, if you don't mind.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Yes.
Okay. So Brenda, by the way, just to clarify who I am, I'm the pesky guy that asked you all those questions when you were at the township meeting on February 28th. So I'm wondering, within the JED itself, is it possible to tax? Can the JED be set up to tax one set of employees but not another? So in other words, could we, during the construction phase, tax the construction workers that are going to be out at that high school site, but not tax the high school employees at the same time?
No. So the JED statute currently lets you exclude workers based on parcels or buildings. So if you had a JED that had, say, 5 buildings in it, and you wanted to tax the workers in 4 of the buildings, but not the 5th building, you could under the current statute. But you couldn't say, oh, we're going to tax, you know, all of the, you know, engineers in all of the buildings, but none of the accountants. You can't do that. So it's sort of by a parcel or an address as opposed to a type of employee.
Okay, so we could conceivably exempt the high school, the current high school building from the JED tax. And I'm guessing, and Mr. Richards can confirm this, I'm guessing that there will be a new high school built and not on that exact site. So the employees going into the new high school building would be taxed, as well as the employees going in to the rest of the buildings. But if we exempted the current building, then we could go ahead and start the tax on the construction workers during the construction phase without adversely affecting the high school building employees. Is that correct?
Right, but then are you envisioning that the tax would later kick in for the high school building, or are you saying that the current high school building would go away and nothing would be on that particular parcel and all of the new buildings would be different?
My understanding, and I have not looked at any of the construction plans or anything, so I hope Mr. Richards will kick in if I'm wrong. My understanding is that the current high school building is going to be demolished at the end of this project. It's not? Okay.
You are muted, Mr. Richards.
Gone. Technology.
Yet again, you would think I'd be good at this. The current high school is the intent for that is to be a 6-8 building. Upon completion of the rest of the building project, we would be building a K5/912 building with grades 6 through 8 moving into the current high school.
Okay. So Brenda, can you think outside the box and come up with a good way we can exempt the current high school employees during the construction?
Well, I need to see a plan, a site plan of what's where now and what will be where when we're finished. Yeah, that's going to take a lot of creativity based on this conversation, but this is one of those things where we need a picture to actually know what we're talking about.
Okay. And one other question then, is it possible to have one rate in effect for, say, the first 5 years and then a different rate as long as it does not exceed the maximum allowable tax rate for the JED for
Yes.
years 6 through 30?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I would encourage Mr. Wofsig to take a look and here again somehow figure out what you guys are going to lose. As Mr. Stubbs pointed out earlier in the session, that there's approximately 25% of the school employees actually are residents of the city of Germantown, and I haven't done the math on this. I mean, I'm just kind of trying to think outside the box on ways to least affect the employees, but still maintain the goal of getting revenue to people. I'm wondering what the math would work out if you had a lower rate within the JED, 0.5%, 0.75%, whatever. So, and then we split that evenly. But as that money comes through, the people in the city of Germantown are, their 60% credit is lower because their amount of they paid is lower. And so then the city of Germantown gets a higher rate based on their 1.5% overall that the employees have to kind of make up. So.
No, I think that's good input. I started going down a path similar to that maybe 6 months ago, and it almost got so convoluted that it made my head hurt. And it's kind of static, it's a snapshot in time today, right? But let's say, we pass another income tax and everybody starts moving out. Nobody wants to live here anymore, right? Then it'll change. I mean, there's 1,000 factors that's going to have some impact on these numbers. So everything we have right now is kind of an estimate, which is why I think we keep saying, we need to be flexible with how we implement this. But I agree. I think there's something. There's definitely some room there because of those employees that do live here.
Right. And, that's what Excel's for, is to kind of play with the numbers. So I'm just suggesting that, do some little what if scenarios within Excel, throw in some numbers, but unfortunately you need employee specific numbers and, what's being withheld, where they're working, where they're currently living and so on to do all that. And so as Mr. Richards and Laura and I have all been discussing. Unfortunately, the Ohio law does not allow for individual withholding records to be part of public records request. So I do also have a question for, I believe it's Mr. Lamb, and you're the mayor of Farmersville.
That's correct.
Okay, and I apologize. I've been meaning to call your income tax department.
But I can't hear you. I'm sorry, Mark. Could you repeat that? We were not able to hear you.
Okay. No, I apologize. I've been meaning to call your income tax department for weeks and just haven't had the time to do it. But does Farmersville allow 100% credit for taxes paid to other municipalities? Or do you have some sort of resident tax credit like the city of Germantown does?
We don't offer resident tax credit.
So the employees that would be working in the JED would get 100% of the credit. So they will not pay any tax, even if you've got a Farmersville resident that works out at the JED. That employee right there is not going to be paying any tax directly to the village of Farmersville. Or do they still have to pay their 1%?
Are you asking once the school is moved to German Township?
I'm asking if you've got an employee that works anywhere outside of the village of Farmersville, do they get any credit whatsoever? Let's say they work in Dayton. Do they get any credit whatsoever to the amount that they've paid to Dayton against their Farmersville 1% income tax?
Oh, I understand. Just a general question.
Yeah.
No.
No. Okay. All right. So, and then I think you need to take a look, you need to take a look also then at how many of the employees within the school district actually live within Farmersville. So, I mean, I don't know how many that is, but you know, those employees will still be paying an income tax. So that has to be looked at against the amount of the overall revenue that the junior high generates.
One thing that was brought up is the high school currently is one parcel. The other parts being added are separate parcels. Does that matter in the taxing for the JED? If we exclude the high school, current high school, and leave what? Leave the parcel separate. Leave the parcel separate that the current high school is on. Can we tax just the other parcels and get construction only?
Was that a question to Ms. Waymer?
Yes, if the high school is on a specific parcel and all the construction is done on different parcels, does that help in splitting it up for taxing only construction and not Valley View employees?
But are you talking about in the situation of a 5-year only JED, or are we talking about a long-term JED?
Short-term construction only.
Well, right, yes. So, I mean, if you're talking about a 5-year only JED or construction period only, however many years that turns out to be, the high school building as it currently exists is a separate parcel, you can have that excluded from the income tax application during the term of the JED.
Thank you.
As long as the other entities are okay, comfortable speaking on this, I think that I personally would like to see the long-term JED because I believe German Township is going to continue to incur expenses, as well as Farmersville mentioned, their expenses are not going anywhere, right? They're going to have to pay for the lift station and the things that go with that. So, but my question is, talking about numbers, I mean, we have to start somewhere talking about numbers. I know there's been a rough draft thrown out. It's been several months ago. And my understanding of that, please correct me if I'm wrong, is it is 100% a working document that can be changed before, obviously it goes before an approval. So it sounds like, my understanding is that people are okay with the theory of a JED, whether it be 5 years, long-term. If we were able to talk about numbers, would that help anything? I know that there was a discussion last time about how if German Township was getting a greater percentage, then I believe it was you, Mr. Stubbs, said that you would be more okay with the longer term JED. So is that something that, I don't know if the other entities feel comfortable talking numbers, feel comfortable talking the breakdown? I believe in our last meeting, right now, the way that it was written, like I said several months ago, was before construction begins, before there are construction workers out there. So the stuff being done in offices that are not here that we're getting money for, the current money, if the JED is passed, that high school employees are paying, the way that it was written months ago was that that money would be divvied up amongst the 4 entities. So through the discussion last time, if I remember correctly, was that since it is in German Township, Farmersville is not losing anything right now. Germantown would not be losing anything right now. That money, that revenue would go straight to German Township, that whole amount. That's the notes I have written down. So I don't know if you guys want to chime in on that, if you guys feel comfortable talking about numbers at all.
No, I think you're right. And just to clarify, in that particular scenario, we would actually lose a little bit, only because those teachers that work at the high school but live in town here, instead of paying the full 1.5% to Germantown, would pay 1.5% to the JED, which would then be redirected to German Township. They would only pay just a little over 0.5% back to Germantown. So we'd lose roughly 1% there. But again, it's kind of in the weeds. In the big picture here, we're talking long-term contracts. I don't want to get stuck on something that small, a credit of a handful of employees. If it gets the deal done, let's figure it out. And I think Germantown and Farmersville, and you guys, I think we understand it's all about flexibility here. Now, to one point, and I'm glad you brought this up. I'm trying to clarify trying to make sure I have a full understanding of Jake's proposal there. In terms of, I think you said with either the 5-year or the 30-year long-term, whatever it is, we would take the SRO or take a flat rate off the top, whatever. We'll call it a policing, take a policing tax off the top. Then we would split that evenly. Would we, at some point, we got to figure this out. Would we split it evenly, even with Jackson Township? Now, we've always included Jackson. I want to include Jackson. I think it's critical that we do include Jackson because we're all one school district here, right? But if it comes down to it and we got to make the numbers work, we got to look at the contributions that are going from each of the entities, making sure we cover all our costs. And so should we be getting into an equal split of that revenue when there technically isn't any added cost on Jackson Township? Now, I understand their police department does a incredible job even stopping in at the high school. And they likely would continue to do that even on this new parcel. But I think it's something that we do need to consider as far as if we do go down this equal share. We may need to look at that when it comes to making the numbers work.
So I'll speak for Farmersville and just touch on that comment just briefly. So been in discussion with Jackson Township Police Chief and some of their officers. Of course, that's who has jurisdiction in Farmersville right now as well. They will be just as involved with the school now or in the future as they are now. So just to confirm that statement, Brian, they plan on being just as involved in the future as they are now. So I think their contribution will be, a great asset to the school. And in terms of the original question from Abra, I think, the purpose of the JEDD, it was presented to me as really a way for German Township to be able to tax construction workers and employees of the school. Now, one benefit to the JEDD is that Germantown and Farmersville will have the opportunity potentially to recoup lost income from or lost revenue from income tax. So that's just to answer your question. Construction tax revenue is 100% negotiable, if we want to use those terms. It would be an added benefit to us, but it's not something we're banking on. It's not something we, frankly, transparently deserve. So that's why we could negotiate with that number all day. The reason I do support a long-term levy is it does allow us the opportunity to recoup a portion, and hopefully a large portion, and maybe even the majority portion of our lost tax revenue.
So with that's been my understanding the whole time, was that the other entities are pretty flexible with their numbers. Obviously, German Township is going to be new expenses for us for most things out there, because we do not, incur. We don't incur as much now as we will once the whole district goes out there. I just really hate to see us get hung up. I think the school needs an SRO at some point, but through talking with Mr. Richards, it doesn't sound like, sorry to speak to Mr. Richards, but it doesn't sound like that is something that is a real pressing issue. It kind of almost seems like we are getting the cart before the horse and saying, here's your SRO, you're going to have an SRO. And Mr. Richards isn't saying, please, I need an SRO, or can they even pay the other 25%? So if we're saying we pay 75%, what are, do they even feel comfortable? Where are we? So my feeling is that the entities need to decide that the different percentages that they feel is appropriate to be split, and then work from there. And then after those percentages are agreed upon, then those other details, such as throwing in a certain amount of money from each entity, can then be worked out, whether or not it is thrown in or not. But we at least need to have some starting numbers so that we know what we're working with.
The school wouldn't incur any cost from the SRO because 75% was paid for by the JEDD. The 25% was paid for by German Township as the officer for the rest of the year. One of the comments you skipped over earlier was from Mark Keener, who said, we have a contract of 185 days per year. 250 days are scheduled as working days per year, which equals 74%. So 74, 75%, I'm pretty close on how much time that officer would spend at the location.
Mr. Stubbs, I totally agree and understand where you're coming from. I guess the question there is, is that additional 25% that Germantown would pay, is that for an incremental officer or one we already have on staff? Because I think that's my biggest fear here, right, is we jointly with the other municipalities pay 75% of an SRO, and in 3 months they're not in school. We're paying for that in Germantown by ourselves, German Township by ourselves. And that's my point of why I think a JEDD should exist. If we're going to incur additional costs, I think we should have a JEDD in place to recover those additional costs. And that is different from just the revenue recovery piece that we've been talking. So again, I can go either way. If we think that there's going to be incremental costs, I think it's irresponsible for us not to put a JEDD in place to cover those costs by the entity that's driving it. If we don't think there's incremental costs, then I'm okay also not putting a JEDD in place, because I think long term, these things happen. We have a 3 to 5 year period here where Jackson Township or Germantown and Farmersville can wind down their collection over the next 5 years and plan for this. But I think that's the point is we have a broad constituency. I'm really tired of talking about teacher salaries right now because it's irrelevant to me. We're not here to represent teachers. We're here to represent German Township, and Village of Farmersville. So it gets a little frustrating when we continue to get in that discussion. The point is, are we going to have incremental costs that we're going to have to incur? If so, then do we want to tax the people that are driving that? If we don't think there's incremental costs, then maybe we don't need a JED. But if you're saying we're going to pay for the other 25%, that's incremental cost to our budget the way I understand it.
I talked to Chief Anzik, it's been a couple months ago, but that was what we came up with in our conversation, that 75% covered by the JED was reasonable. And then the German Township would be able to budget for the rest of it. I would assume we may need a new officer at that point. So 75% of a new officer is covered. So we're looking at 25% of a officer salary. But to the other point you just made, I don't know what costs we may incur in the future, but I think that to give us a 5 or a short term, I'm not going to put a year amount on it, length on it, but a construction only JED gives us time to collect the money, and if at the expiration of the JED, that if we put this short term one in place, we would be able to in the future to do it long term if the costs were there. So to rush to tax people now that we may or may not need, I think it would be better to go the other way with it. And if we need it in the future, that's an option to go back to, not collect it now because we might need it. Let's collect it in the future if we do.
I understand that perspective, I guess, knowing how difficult this has been already. It's been going on for 6-8 months of these types of discussions. To do it in the future when there's no expectation costs are going down. I don't think anyone thinks that we're going to go in some kind of deflationary period. The costs are only going to go up and our tax dollars do not increment the same way our cost expenditures do. So I don't think that it takes much imagination to understand the costs will continue to go up and that this will be a very difficult discussion again to rekindle in 4 years. Again, I'm fine with supporting if the group wants to support a short-term JED for the construction only revenue. To cover, costs to get the school's infrastructure up and running and those types of things. And that's the benefit we provide back. I would stay away from an SRO, especially if it's only a short-term JED, because what's the point of offering them an SRO for a few years and then taking it away from them? I think that doesn't make a lot of logical sense. If they're going to have to pay for it long-term, they're going to have to budget for that up front and determine if they want that. Again, I'm just going to continue to hang my hat on, I think there's incremental expenses. And I think that the JED would cover those additional costs. I'm all for talking a 1% JED, and that would not impact as many people as dramatically. And I think we could still cover some costs. But I guess I don't want to be short-sighted. I think way too many people are focusing on teacher salaries, and if the teacher's going to be double taxed, when we have a lot of people in our community that are double taxed that work in other places already today, and we're not considering them in this discussion.
Well, you're not taxing them. You're just specifically taxing school employees.
Well, the assumption you're making is that we wouldn't have to tax them with the revenue and costs that we may incur with this new school in a different location. And that can be an assumption you're making, but your assumption is we can cover any incremental costs that the school may generate and any lost revenues that the school leaving generated. We can cover that without proposing additional tax on our constituents. That you have to make that assumption not to have that discussion.
I know personally during my time here, we have ran several road levies. So, I mean, I know that they've talked, those are county roads. They are, but you got to think that's a lot more traffic going to that site day in and day out. And so, more wear on the roads definitely means you're going to need to have a lot more upkeep and maintenance on those, which right there is cost. And already our road budget is not meeting what our needs are right now. So I agree with you, Mr. Raymert. I think that costs are, only going to go up, unfortunately, for everybody. It's not going to get any cheaper. So with that, I know I mentioned earlier about if this goes through, the money that is just in the high school right now, if German Township is able to recoup that solely because Farmersville is not losing any money. Germantown, it would not be losing very little, I believe. It really would only be taxing the high school employees that are currently there. And because the high school's in German Township then getting that money directly until the construction starts. Now, once the construction starts, I think that's something that we need to look at. And these are all ballpark figures that were given out, like I said, about 6-8 months ago during the first meeting. And so they could obviously change at any time. They're done by percentages. So it makes it a little easier when you think of percentages than a set amount of money. So I think speaking to you guys earlier, it sounds like even those percentages are something that we can work with and change if need be. So, I just really want to make sure that we are using our time wisely here and maybe talk about the percentage breakdown of money if you guys are comfortable with that.
I agree, Mr. Reed. I think we have to get an agreement that we all think that JED needs to go on for longevity. If Mr. Stubbs, you only feel it should be during the construction phase and numbers won't sway you, that's not the discussion to have then. So I think Mr. Lamb, I don't want to speak on anybody's behalf. Mr. Wofsig, Mr. Reed, and myself, I've said it very clearly tonight. I'm willing to go with a long-term JED because I think we'll incur additional costs. But everyone has to agree first that we want a long-term JED. If it's only a short-term JED, I think that changes the discussion. So I guess, Mr. Stubbs, I would ask you, is there a split, which this is what we left the last meeting with, is there a split that you would be satisfied with, that you would do a long-term JED and we can figure a contribution, whether it's SRO or dollars toward a SRO or whatever, but is there any circumstance where you would consider a long-term JED?
I already said earlier tonight, 25% split. As Brian mentioned earlier, for contributions, equal contributions to the legal fees, equal contributions in the revenue. So 25% split for everyone. Long term.
Okay. So I think that's the most progress we've made so far. I guess Mr. Wofsig and Mr. Lamb, you guys have a rebuttal or discussion on that, particularly, I guess, Mr. Wofsig.
Just a question, is that based on including the SRO? After SRO? And I don't want to muddy the waters. We talked about this SRO a lot. I don't want to backtrack too much, but I know other school districts, they contract with like security companies to offer an SRO. Obviously, that would mean that we wouldn't be responsible for benefits, extra, things that add to an hourly wage of an employee. That wouldn't help the 25%, the 3 months for German Township to have an extra officer. But is that something we're willing to consider too? Is it the SRO or is it the officer that would be a German Township officer that's more important? Okay.
It would need to be a German Township officer.
Okay, and see, from a cost standpoint, that obviously changes quite a bit. We'd be required to pay benefits, everything. So it's not a $50,000 position, it may be a $100,000 position instead. So then when we look at these numbers that from the income that the JED would bring in, you just kind of break it down, even on the, I don't know, we'd have to, those numbers aren't laid out that way right now, but if we look at those numbers, we'd probably figure that out quickly, figure out what's left over and what the split would be.
I agree to that. I think the SRO is a difficult part of this, because if we say 150,000 is about the revenue and you have to pay close to 100, even if it's 75 out for an SRO, and then you have the administrative costs ongoing of collecting the tax revenues and dealing with that. You also have, I think Brenda had laid out, you need directors and insurance, different things like that, maybe bonding or whatever. But it looked like, potentially 7 to 10% of the total revenues collected will be given back to the taxing jurisdiction that collects them and insurance companies or whatever to form the JED. So I think if we do SRO, that definitely makes this bang maybe not as much worth its buck. I mean, if you're going to collect 150,000 and then you pay SRO and all your fees and you're getting 50,000 split 4 ways, I'm not sure we accomplished a whole lot.
Can I jump in? I want to ask the other entities. I had two questions, but right now only one's coming to my head. Hopefully the other one shows up. But my question is, I know there's been some talk about JEDD. I know Mr. Stubbs feels very strongly about the JEDD. As far as from a Farmersville, Jackson Township, Germantown point of view, is that something that you feel strongly about as well? Hopefully I remember my other question here soon.
I think we've all spoke to that a little bit. Just in addition to what we've already said, the potential to recoup our lost income, our residents have made it clear that they want a JEDD. They think it would be best for Valley View Schools. They think it would be best for Farmersville specifically as well.
Well, right. I mean, each one of us has a financial responsibility to our residents to try to recoup the costs that we're losing, right? Just as you guys do. I'm talking German Township to cover any additional costs that you foresee being incurred because the building's out there. Going back to this 25-25-25-25 split, you know, that initial kind of working document we'd thrown out there, we had done kind of a 25 split on the construction costs. And then once the construction cost was over, we kind of changed to cover those costs for Germantown and Farmersville so that we could recoup that, recoup what we were losing. If we were to, and I'm just ignoring the SRO and everything else right now, but if we were to throw out a 25% split across all jurisdictions, that would actually end up giving Farmersville, it looks like, about $15,000 more than they were even losing if we base it on that. And then Jackson, obviously, you know, Jackson would be gaining $35,000 for what? So we're going to have to refine these numbers a little bit. I mean, it sounds good to just go in 25% everybody. When we're talking legal fees, I think our estimate was like $2,500 per entity. If we want to cover legal fees based on the percentage split, that's fine with me too. You know, all this is up for discussion. I don't know that we should be giving a jurisdiction or multiple jurisdictions significantly more money than anything they would need to cover their added costs or even to cover what they're losing. Not that I don't want Farmersville to have $15,000 more dollars, but you know, I don't think that's what we're going for here.
Okay, I agree, and I believe that as a German Township trustee, I believe we were elected by residents to represent German Township as what is the best interest of German Township, and we've mentioned that we're going to incur more costs. I have 3 children currently that will be attending or are attending Valley View, so obviously safety is a huge important thing to me. So, but at the same time, we are not the elected officials to represent the school. The school has that. They have a school board, they have a superintendent and things of that nature. So I believe that we need to do what's best for our residents and figure out a way to recoup some of this revenue that the township is going to incur expenses. So we just need to figure out a way that it will not hit budget-wise the township as hard as it will if we don't have this JEDD in place. So an SRO is nice and it sounds really good, but I just don't know if that is the township's responsibility to provide an SRO to the school.
It could be the JEDD's responsibility to give the JEDD a purpose, which the JEDD currently does not have.
I think as the attorney spoke to, though, we're going to have an economic development plan that we've already got a draft of. I believe I've heard that our economic development person at the city was drafting. And there will be potential. You know, there's extra land on this parcel out there that the school is not sure what they're going to do with it yet. So there's going to be water, there's going to be sewer, there's going to be roads back there now. There's going to be all kinds of stuff on that land that might make it marketable to somebody. I'm thinking specifically, you know, these between Kettering and Miami Valley, they've built health facilities next to schools all over the place. So I don't think there's no purpose. I think this absolutely could drive economic development out there. Now, up front, no. We don't know of anybody right now, right? But a lot of JEDs don't, as Brenda pointed out earlier. But to hint that this is not legal in any way, I think she clarified that at least tonight. It's absolutely a legal purpose. It's a valid JED. It's has the potential to create economic development out there, which is, again, a plus for German Township, because I think one of the other pieces we've actually agreed to is if there ever were a doctor's office or anything that gets built on that land, that would be German Township revenue that German Township would keep in the future.
As of right now, when I look at this document, during construction, if this starts in 2021, which is coming up real fast, but just from the document that we have right here, it looks as though, and that is with German Township keeping the high school tax revenue, that German Township would get between 2021 and 2025, and this is a working document, can change, as Mr. Richards just said, who knows if that's going to stay on track. $268,000. That is huge for German Township. That is really, it's mainly taxing the construction workers that I would assume do not live in German Township or Germantown or Farmersville. There might be a few here and there, but it is money. Oh, did I really like that number though. Okay. Well, they tell me it's not that much because I added the total, but it's still a big number. Well, 180. Well, here's what I did. I took 180 and then I added, if we did the 11,000 instead of divvying that up, giving it all to German Township. So it would actually be 22,000 less than that. So it would really be 246. I apologize, 246,000, which nonetheless to German Township is a huge amount of money that I really hate to see German Township not get. If you've looked at our budget at all, it would definitely dramatically impact German Township's finances. So that is just construction cost. It looks like on this paper. So I mean, going forward from there, there is other ones that I think we need to talk about too. But that's just construction money that I really don't want to lose out on.
Which brings us back to the construction only JED, where we're still going to bring in the same amount of money.
As Mr. Raymer has mentioned, German Township is still going to incur cost after this JED, probably more so once the buildings are built. I mean, more police going out there. We're going to have different road. I know that's county, but not leading up to it. We're going to incur additional costs, as you're aware, because you keep the SRO is needed. So you're aware that there's going to be police out there. We're going to need to do more salting, more. There's just a lot of costs that are going to be spent now that the school is out there, or when, not now, I guess, when the school is out there. And so if we only have this JED go through construction, how are we as German Township looking at our 5-year forecast or our budget? How are we going to pay for those additional expenses? And how are we going to justify to our residents, our constituents, that we had the opportunity to make up some of that lost revenue and we wouldn't do it?
But again, you go back to taxing people in this community extra. But we're also not going out like other entities and buying new buildings and city buildings and stuff too. So we're pretty fiscally responsible at the township. We don't spend money on crazy things. In fact, our budget, we've cut it as much as pretty much possible in the last 2 or 3 years. So I mean, if there is a time, in the future, if we needed to do this again, that's why I said short term now. If we need it in the future, we can have the same discussion. And I don't think a lot of us will be here in that time in 5 years. And the new people can do it. And they can have that discussion. And if a JED is necessary in five or 6 years, whenever this ends, then so be it. We'll have the same discussion again. But to say this is a difficult process, we don't want to waste our time in a couple of years. We just need to pass the whole thing now is a little out of touch.
I personally believe it's a little out of touch to expect that our costs are not going to go up. I mean, things go up every year after year. So I just hate to see the township not try to recoup some of that, the money that we know we're going to need when that time arises. So as well as the other entities are going to need it as well. I mean, they've discussed increased fire, EMS, different things like that. Farmersville is going to have increased expenses from their water lines and lift station, things like that. So it's just hard for me to justify. You've mentioned taxing those teachers, 200 employees. Obviously, their money is just as important as everybody else's. But my theory long term is if we choose to not tax those 200 employees, are we then choosing to tax thousands of residents? Because if we don't have that money, we know here in Durbin Township how hard it is to get road levies and things like that passed. So, and I'm sure other entities know that as well. I just hate to not do it if we have the capability.
Well, one difference when we put levies on the ballot, example, road levy, police levy, whatever it may be, the residents have an opportunity to vote yes or no on it. Here on this JED, the residents, the people that are being taxed do not have an opportunity to vote yes or no on it. So I think those are apples and oranges there. Township residents have the option to vote yes or no on road levies, on police levies, on our joint levies with the city, fire, EMS, that's joint. That's not an added cost to Germantown, as was mentioned earlier. That's a joint cost between German Township and Germantown. So, we give people the opportunity to vote yes or no. If they think we're doing a good job and we need the money, they'll vote yes. If they think we're not, they won't vote yes. And that's not the option that's given to the people in this scenario.
But it's not often given to, if you work in any other municipality where you don't live, you don't get to vote. The residents of that city will vote for additional taxes, and it is what it is, and you continue working. It's sort of the very similar situation here. There will be a representative from the teachers union on the JED board. There will be a representative from the school on the JED board, and then representative from the townships and municipality on the JED board. So there will be some representation, and then of course, they've got each of us to vote in or vote out based on whatever decisions they think we made or didn't.
Well, and it was mentioned in our last meeting that it was taxation without representation. So personally, I think that they are represented by their union. They could go to their union could speak out against that, speak out against the JED if that is how they felt. They're also represented by the school board, and it sounds like the school board is on board with this. So they do have representation. They could contact us. I haven't heard from a single school employee that has mentioned anything negative about this. I've only ever actually heard positive things. So I think that they have the opportunity to reach out to people. And by all means, if you're a school employee and you are against it, please reach out to who you feel is your representative so that we know. I just haven't heard from anyone.
I think the alternative question too is is it reasonable to think that the four communities here have voted in support of a new building out there? Is it reasonable to say that there should be absolutely no tax paid for anyone that works in those buildings? Now, if they live in a city, sure, they're going to still be paying whatever tax wherever they live. But is that fair to everybody else? That everybody works in that building and has absolutely no income tax, And instead, Farmersville loses their biggest employer, Germantown loses their biggest employer, and now we've got to go around cutting the budget or asking for additional tax revenue from our residents while the employees at the school continue to not pay any tax. It doesn't make sense to me to make that argument.
And that's why I see the exact middle ground, because that's my overarching question is what is right for our community? And that could be broad as Valley View or your individual jurisdiction, but I really struggle to believe the right thing to do for our community is not to put a JED in place. Now, with that being said, again, I'm okay with a 5-year construction JED to try to make sure that we have the right infrastructure and buys us a little bit more time with each of our municipalities. I don't know that that's still the right thing long term for our communities, but I don't know how anybody could sit here tonight and say the right thing for our broad community is Valley View is to not put a JED in place, even though we're going to incur additional costs and we're going to lose tax revenues. And that when we know that those hundreds of thousands of dollars are leaving over the next 5 years and not coming back in our municipalities where funding, to Mr. Stubbs' point, has continued to be cut over the last 10 years. I mean, you can look at what the state's done to cut all the city's funding over the last 10 years. The other thing I think people are short-sighted on is the state of Ohio income tax rate has dropped for 10 straight years. So people are making more off the state, and yes, they're paying more to the local, but that's just a shift. That's an economic shift. And so I think the JED is the right thing for our communities long term. And that's where I would like to see someone argue against that and not take the teacher perspective, because I don't understand that. We're not representing 200, we're representing thousands.
I don't think anybody here is arguing against the JED in place. I've said multiple times, short-term construction only. So I'm not sure where we're getting that someone here is opposed to a JED in place.
Okay, so great. I like that. We have 5 years. Everyone's aligned to 5 years. We would have to figure that split out. Long term, do we think over the next 20 years we're better off with a JED or without a JED?
I think that's something to determine in 5 years or whenever this ends. I don't think we should add this on now. We're not taxing people just because we can. So construction only, exempting the current Valley View employees, get the construction money, and 5 years from now or whenever the construction ends, if we need to have a discussion again, we'll have a discussion. I equally split 25%. And if it's a short term, no SRO. So 25% apiece, no SRO in the short term because there's no long term plan, and equally split 25% apiece.
Mr. Stubbs, if we do it that way, German Township would lose out on $88,000. Is there a reasoning or a rationale, or how do we justify that to our constituents, our residents? Why are we turning down $88,000?
How are we losing $88,000?
Well, if you look at this paper, it's $11,000 split amongst Germantown, Farmersville, German Township, Jackson Township. That's a rough number. They have said, I started out with this, that we could get all of the 44,000. 44,000 for 2 years is 88,000. So that would be German Township saying no to $88,000. That's a hard justification to make to people.
I don't think it's $86,000 or $88,000 that we're losing. We don't have that money to begin with. So you're assuming we have something that we don't have. You could also say, well, the paper we have here says at the end of the thing we'll have $180,000. Well, this is just a working document. So the fact that it's a working document, you can't say we're going to lose X amount of dollars. We're still in negotiations of how this is going to be broke down. I think it's, if you want to be community oriented, as has been mentioned by other people, 25% apiece for each jurisdiction makes sense. It's a short term. And then we figure it out at the end of that. It's not kicking the can down the road, as others have said. It's waiting. If we need the money and we need the revenue, and when this is over, we'll deal with it at that point in time. Right now, we don't need it. Not that we don't need it, but we don't have it. And to tax people for a maybe is not a great idea.
Wouldn't you be taxing the construction workers over a maybe then as well?
Yeah, I think there's that point. I think also, Jake, this is different for us versus the other townships because you say we don't need it now, but there's two other jurisdictions that do need it now. So I understand from our perspective. I mean, if you talk about the total community, the community will be losing those dollars now.
Okay. I don't follow the logic of that because they're still collecting revenue for the next, well, until the schools move. So they're going to get additional money for the next, construction period.
No, I get what you're saying, but we know within the next 3 to 5 years, those municipalities and jurisdictions, they will lose that revenue. That's not a maybe. That's not something we have to revisit to see later. We know for a fact they will be losing revenue. Now, the exact dollar amount, I totally understand the discussion there because it seems like it's pretty hard for everyone to narrow down on what the exact dollar amount is. But I guess I'm just taking to your point of saying we don't know that we need it. Well, we do know that certain jurisdictions will be losing that funding.
But again, we've lost funding over the years, whether it be the local government fund and others that we've had incurred here at the township, and we've made it work. So, and to give a 5-year or short-term amount of money that gives you time to plan for the future, I don't think is unreasonable.
Can I ask the other entities real quick, their feelings, I guess, on this? I know you have heard mine, you have heard Mr. Stubbs, as far as 5-year JEDD, long-term JEDD, 25% split SRO. I mean, we can sit up here all day and discuss it, but where do you guys stand on that?
I'll just say, so to Mr. Stubbs' point, he's right. I mean, yes, we've all lost a significant amount of money, right? When the 2013 local government fund was cut from Germantown and they changed the estate tax revision, we've lost a significant amount of money over the last 7 years. And what else can you do, right? As Mr. Raymer pointed out, all that really did was shift the burden more locally. And, you know, we've come out and asked for an income tax increase. We've asked for levies. We've asked for road levies. They've failed. So we get by as best we can. We make cuts where we can, and we move on. My view of this particular situation is we can actually make a change here where maybe it's not so harmful for everybody. In fact, some of the jurisdictions actually come out ahead. So whereas we face state cuts, nothing we can do about it, right? We either cut expenses or raise additional revenue. We actually can fix this if we can all come to some agreement. And I've been involved, I was involved in this back in, was it 2016 or so? The last time we talked about this, you know, the levy ended up failing and we kind of faded away for a while. Now we've come back, we've hired the attorney, we've gotten as far as we've gotten this time around. I see a 5-year as kicking the can. You either need the revenue or you don't. We know we're going to need the revenue. You guys, I'm fairly certain are going to need the revenue. So I don't want to kick the can anymore. I don't want to push this on somebody else 5 years from now. Now, that's not to say whatever we put in this document right now is set in stone. I mean, in that original proposal that we'd sent out, we had I think a 25% break for the construction revenue, which is sort of where we are today. So it almost sounds like we've kind of agreed to that first half of that document. Now we got to figure out the second half. We can figure out the second half, which would be the split after construction is complete, then I think we've gotten somewhere. And if we need to add another tier, we can add another tier. I mean, we can make this as complicated as we need to. But I just hate to kick the can. We know there's going to be additional costs on everybody. We know we're going to lose revenue. So I'd like to see us get there. And at some point, to Ms. Reed's comment, we're going to have to sit down and just knock out the numbers. I don't think we're going to do that tonight, but I think we have made progress, and it's been a good discussion. I'll leave it at that.
Simply put, for Farmersville, I was asked by our council to do whatever I could to try to recoup the income that we'll lose because of this move. So that's where we stand on it. Won't drag it out. I think, taxation without representation has been mentioned, but I don't think that applies if we're willing to tax construction workers without them being represented, but not tax teachers without them being represented. I think, to be fair, I think that argument has to go. And I think, to Tyler's point, when you look at your constituents who we represent, who are we representing? 200 teachers, 250 teachers, or are we representing our communities at large? So again, simply put, Farmersville Council, who represents the interest of Farmersville residents, asked me, do what you can to fight to recoup our lost income.
Jackson Township, how do you guys feel about a short-term, long-term JEDD, SRO, that sort of thing?
Look at a couple different ways. If we're talking about a long-term SRO, I think that it's not going to be provided by the school. Then I believe that the only choice you have is to go long-term. Otherwise, how are you going to pay for it? If we're not talking about an SRO, talking about construction, 5-year plan, just from talking with some of the other trustees, is what they saw would work, and then revisit from there to make another plan. Again, from the Jackson Township standpoint, it's hard for us, without doing anything but gaining, hard for us to say one way or another, because, I mean, honestly, let's be truthful, it's not costing us anything. We're only really gaining. I do have an interest for German Township. I think that German Township is taking the biggest brunt of all of this. I've said that from the start, at the very beginning of this, when I was asked to come on and represent. I think that German Township and Farmersville are taking, those two are the most important to me. And that's my personal view. That's how I feel. But anyone who's losing those dollars is a concern to me. The 5-year plan makes sense. If you're talking about taxing and looking at just the construction part of it and then possibly revisiting it, again, whether you're talking about different people looking at it or how you're doing it, maybe it makes sense to have the new people that come in with a better idea or how to go about it. But personally, I think it all depends on where you're at. What are you looking at? Are you looking at an SRO? If you're looking at an SRO, I don't think you have any choice but to look long term. If you're looking at no SRO and the school's not paying for one, and we're not going to have an SRO, I think you can then talk about the 5-year plan. But if you're talking SRO, we don't have a choice.
Okay, thank you. I just think it's good to know kind of what each entity stands at and feels on both of those things. So at this time, I don't know. I mean, I feel like we've talked a lot. I was really hoping to get a little bit more accomplished this evening. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add or to say.
I feel like we need to come up with the right takeaways because this thing's just going to continue to spin. I mean, we're not going to vote tonight, but I think everyone has said they're at least supportive of a five-year, or as Mr. Stubbs has termed it, a construction only. I think that's an option. I think the other option is the long-term, in addition, adding an SRO for the long-term tax. So I guess we need to get to a point where we're ready to, agree on one of those two approaches, and then we iron out the percentage split after that. I think if we agree structurally long term, we can figure out the split. But I don't know that we can even agree structurally long term right now.
I do want to jump in there real quick, Mr. Raymer, because for me, and I mentioned this briefly, giving up the 88,000, and I know it's in theory money, as Mr. Stubbs put, is on paper, but so is all this money technically. Again, it's really hard for me to justify that to the constituents, and I am all for construction. JED, I want to see a long-term JED. I would prefer a long-term JED, and I will do, what I need to do and continue to set up these meetings and hopefully get something going for that. Obviously, before we leave, I would like to set up another meeting day or time to try to hopefully at that one talk about numbers a little bit and try to get some more things ironed out. Yeah. So with that, if is there anyone else who has any comments to make, I guess, about the JED? I do appreciate all of you coming. I know this has been a long meeting. But are there any other questions or comments before we go to schedule the next meeting?
Just to be clear, will the next meeting, the intent just be more discussion? When do we get to the point where we ask the what do we do from here question if we all can't agree? I mean, to be fair, it's good to talk, it's good to discuss, it's good to know where everybody stands, but I think we've established that at this point. So I guess at what point do we get to that point where we say, where do we go from here?
I agree with that statement, actually, and I guess my feeling is we need to, no matter what, hash out the numbers or decide the numbers, because ultimately, if German Township and Jackson Township, I believe, are the two that have to be unanimous in their voting. If we cannot be unanimous, it goes before a vote, and what goes before a vote of the people is what we discuss or what we agree upon. It is not this proposal that was proposed 8 months ago. So I think that if we're at an impasse, then we need to decide on something, and then it needs to go before the voters. I don't think it should just die with us. If we're 100% at an impasse, let's agree on something and put it before the residents.
And if we get to that point where it needs to go in front of the voters, is it just the majority of people involved that would decide what that would look like, what would be proposed to the voters?
That is really a question for the attorney, Brenda, and that's a really good question. So, Brenda, can you answer that or elaborate that on a little bit? Okay. And just to clarify that question, if we come to an impasse, if you will, how do we decide what is going to be put on the proposal?
So if you're at a point where you think that everybody is not going to agree, and that then yes, the majority of the people involved in putting the agreement together would put the agreement together with their position. So, and then they would take it to their individual jurisdictions for approval. And if it doesn't get unanimous approval at one or more of the townships, then it goes on the ballot in that township. It doesn't go on the ballot in all of the jurisdictions, only in the townships. And if one of the townships votes unanimously and the other one doesn't, only in the township that did not vote unanimously. So you need to work towards an agreement that you think is, most likely to be approved by the municipality councils, which only have to be majority, and likely to be approved by your voters if you're certain it's not going to get unanimous board support.
And Brenda, just to clarify one piece of this, I know you've answered this before. If it did go using German Township for an example, if it went to German Township because we are completely surrounded by German Township, the municipality residents would also vote on that. What are the rules as far as how the vote goes, or who would actually vote?
Right. So the township would vote. And so if Germantown municipality is wholly within the township and has not withdrawn, then yes, if Germantown residents usually vote on German Township matters, they would then also be voting on this as a resident of the township, not as a resident of the municipality. If there are areas of the municipality that are in the township and other areas that are outside of the township, only those areas that are in the township would vote on it.
So we think that would then just be German Township residents. Is that correct, Mr. Stubbs? The unincorporated would be the people that would vote on the JED if it was German Township. Okay, when you said, Brenda, that yes, I guess we need 100% clarification on that, but that's what we think, but we don't know. So when you said the majority of people involved with the JED, so when you say majority of people, would that be the majority of, like right now we have representatives from each entity, and then all of German Township is on the call? Would that mean that the majority of German Township decide on it, or the majority of each different municipality or township agree? When you said majority, what does that really mean? Majority of each different entity?
So as I understand the conversations that have gone on tonight, it appears that everyone except one person may be in favor of a longer-term JED. And while some people are open to a shorter-term JED, they're also open to a longer-term JED, with the exception of one person who thinks that a short-term JED is the only correct way to go without a long-term commitment to an SRO officer. So that means that then the people who are in favor of a long-term JED from the get-go need to put forth the proposal that is, palatable to them. Who those, who that group is up to, each party. Is it, multiple representatives from the township, one person from the township sort of negotiating with one person from the municipality of Farmersville, and one person from Germantown, and one person from Jackson, and one person from German? Do the four of them get together and come up with their best plan and then go back to their respective, boards and councils and administrators and say, here's what we've come up with. Is this acceptable, to our group? Do we need to tweak it? And then, you come out with what seems to be palatable to everybody, but is, maybe not 100% what everybody wanted, but is a compromise that everybody can live with. I can't say who those people should be, but if you want to put a proposal forward for a longer-term JED, it's probably not going to include the person who's not in favor of a long-term JED for purposes of getting something together along those lines.
No, that makes sense. Okay, that was my question. I just wanted to clarify that. So going forward, as far as scheduling a meeting, And this, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Brenda. I have one clarification question and one other question. Clarification: did you mention, or did you say earlier that both townships involved in a proposed JED would vote on this? So that would go on a ballot in front of both townships?
Well, not necessarily. So let's say that Jackson Township trustees unanimously vote to approve it. It doesn't need to go on the ballot in Jackson Township. If German Township trustees do not have a unanimous vote to approve it, it would go on the ballot in German Township.
That clarifies that.
And the statute does not make a distinction between the unincorporated area versus the entire. I believe it's the entire, but I'm going to have to go through the statute a little bit more to give you a definitive answer on whether it's only the unincorporated part of the township or the entire township that it goes on the ballot in.
I guess my other question was somewhat answered, but I'm still a little curious about who would put together the proposal that would be put in front of the voters. I don't know if it would be made up of, Farmersville Council, Germantown Council, Jackson Township trustees, and German Township trustees, or if it would be just the people that are representing each municipality plus all of the trustees in both townships, or if it'd be the future JED board. So if you could answer that question, I'd appreciate it.
So it's really up to each of you. So for instance, in Farmersville, council would decide who do we want to, represent us in future meetings. You're here tonight representing, your entity. Who do they want involved in those discussions and negotiations? Is it one person? Is it two? Is it three? It's whatever you as an entity feel is comfortable. It's probably, best that it's somebody from council. If you don't have a city manager, in some cases it's the mayor. In some cases it's, the city manager. In other cases it's one or two council members. Similarly for the board of, trustees. Is it one of the trustees? Is it more than one of the trustees? And it doesn't have to be the same for, the townships. This township may say, this person is going to handle it. Over here, they may say, we're sending two people to, deal with it. Similarly with the municipalities, this one's sending the mayor, this one's sending the city manager, this one's, it's really up to you guys who you want in those discussions and negotiations on your behalf.
That answers my question perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, and then as you guys put together proposals that are, palatable, I will draft it into the agreement that you will then each review to make sure that that's your understanding of what you thought, was being presented and agreed to before it goes to the next level, which is then, review by your legal counsels and public hearings, and then votes by each individual jurisdiction, and then maybe it has to go on the ballot somewhere.
Yeah. So moving forward, I guess the different entities, what do you believe would be best? It sounds like for the most part, you guys are sending one representative from each municipality or jurisdiction. So is that something where, German Township, we've had our whole board on here for the last two meetings. If we do that, they all are open, meetings. We have to advertise, which is 100% fine. We've had great turnout from the citizens. They've had really good questions. Is that something that we want to do again? I mean, kind of what is the feeling? And this, I guess, is for Mr. Raymer and Mr. Stubbs for the most part, because we are not sending a representative, if you will. We are all here. So I believe, and Brenda, I hate to speak for you, but that it's, if we put forth a proposal, if we send a representative from each jurisdiction, we put together a proposal, then that proposal comes back to the board for review. And then you have the time to make that discussion before anything goes before a public, via the 30-day where the public comes and talks, and then you review it before it becomes before a vote and everything. So Mr. Raymer and Mr. Stubbs, looking forward, I know when we started this, that is kind of how it started was with just one representative. And now we have all of us, which is fine. I'm just trying to figure out what is moving forward, Mr. Raymer and Mr. Stubbs. What do we want to do? I mean, obviously all three of us are not on board with the same ideas for a JEDD. So looking forward, what would we like to do? What did I say for? Oh, okay. Well, can you say that on there so we can hear? I'm sorry.
All three of us.
Go ahead, Mr. Stubbs. Okay, I'm fine. I was here, as a trustee when you guys started this discussion. I think, Abra, you were the representative. I'm fine with that continuing forward. But I'm also, if we need one more discussion and Mr. Stubbs feels like, there's one more thing or more clarity we can provide to have one more discussion, I can manage one more. I don't think, though, it's fruitful to continue on if we're not gathering additional data and have checkpoints of what we're going to go gather before we speak again.
And I want to jump in quickly. I asked that question about what happens next, not necessarily meaning it has to be the next meeting. I'm fine with another discussion. I'm just wondering how many more we want to do. And when we get to that point, just to say, hey, let's put a proposal together that the majority stands behind. So I just wanted to clarify that. I'm not suggesting that next meeting has to be, let's start working on the proposal.
I'd like to meet at least one more time. I think we've worked out the short-term JEDD, and I think that there's support for that. I think that's an ideal way to go. So hopefully we can get some more support backing that.
Yeah, the question is, or it's a comment really, I am uncomfortable with these remote meetings. I propose the next meeting be held after we can attend in person. My concern with that is, yeah, that might be a long way away. We have mentioned, I believe, several of our own German Township meetings that currently under the governor's orders, we have 10 people. We have had way better turnout actually with remote meetings than we've had with in-person meetings. One meeting we had upwards of 25, 26 people, which for German Township meetings is huge. So I understand the uncomfortableness with remote meetings. However, my feeling is there are people logging on. And unfortunately, with the way that it is right now, I'm not sure that our German Township Hall could hold all of these people that we have and be safe and socially distant. Also, with that being on a computer, if we have people in close quarters, then we all have to wear masks. Being able to hear one another through a computer with a mask on is quite difficult. Yeah, yes, we can't legally gather, as Nick Lamb is saying, we can't legally gather with more than 10. So, I mean, we can't go against the governor's orders. I don't want this thing to drag out. I know Mr. Richards has said they're wanting to start moving dirt in the spring. So if we wait, I mean, unfortunately, COVID numbers are only on the rise. We don't know. I wish I had a crystal ball and I could say they were going to end and we can meet for sure in March, but I don't have that crystal ball. But I would like to see these meetings continue. And I think the way that this format, I think, worked fine. Personally, having the representatives in person, having the citizens remote. I mean, you guys were able to ask questions. I feel like it's going well. I apologize that you're uncomfortable with that. I'm just not sure how else to safely and following the governor's guidelines do this right now.
Yeah, I would add, I know that face-to-face helps for communication, but at the end of the day, I think this is effective, and it's the environment that we're in, and we need to move business forward. So I don't think it'd be prudent or responsible to postpone until we can meet completely in face, although that's the path everyone would love to go if everything could be optimal. The other thing I'd say, I guess, is the takeaway for me from this meeting is I would ask Nick and Brian and Mrs. Reed, all three of you to consider if there is a 5-year plan, or it can be, let's call it a short-term plan, because I know Mr. Stubbs is saying not just 5 years, he's saying construction. I actually think there could be an opportunity to do a 7-year plan where it's kind of a blend, but it gives you guys more than ample time to wind down your tax revenues and adjust your budgets, over that time period. So I guess I would ask for you guys to consider a short-term plan and how you can be satisfied in that. I think Mr. Stubbs made it clear that he can be satisfied there. Absent of that, after the next meeting, if we can't come to an agreement on a short term, I do think it makes sense to go back to just having one representative per jurisdiction meeting and coming up with whatever they think is the right option for the community to vote on. So I'm fine there, but I think to Mr. Stubbs' point, let's all try to come up with a short-term solution next time. And if we can't find that, then it's on to back to the smaller group.
So there's Mrs. Sewell mentioned that the House Bill 2404 was extended today to allow for virtual meetings to extend. Was it through when of 2021? July of 2021. So that has been extended. I think that just happened recently. Today, pretty recent. So I kind of agree with Mr. Raymer that one more meeting with all of us, and then hopefully we can get things hashed out. And then after that, do one representative and see how that goes. I mean, every representative would still have a voice, even if you set one representative, because you would all go back to the table. So looking forward, date-wise for, I know we're getting into the holiday season, if we're going to stick with the same, I guess, format. Are you guys comfortable with the same format as far as having us in person and the visitors remote? Are you comfortable with that? Okay. I see heads nodding, so I think that's a yes from the people that are here. Also, so follow up with dates or availability. She's getting German Township's high-tech calendar off the wall right now, so we can look at it to see when the Township Hall is open. Yeah, that's right. We do have one. So we're scheduling it around his public records request?
Well, he's requesting information about that. He's mentioned that earlier. So I think that if he's going out and requesting information, that he's going to get that information. He's requested. I don't know what to ask him. So he requested stuff from school.
So, Mr. Stubbs, I guess if you have comments like that, if you could turn on your mic so that everybody can hear that.
I'm gonna unmute. Okay, so I have the calendar in front of me. It looks like the first, these are unavailable dates. The 1st, 8th, 10th, and 14th are officially unavailable.
So
as far as I know right now.
Our meeting would be on the 14th. I know that's, I don't know Farmersville when you meet or when Jackson meets, but the same. Okay, Farmersville, when is your regular meeting? I'm sorry, I don't know that.
We meet second and fourth Monday.
Okay, so Mondays are out because Germantown also meets on Monday. So it's like all the Mondays are gone in December.
14 and 28. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to all have that meeting before this next meeting?
I personally think it would be, you want to have the next township meeting before we meet this?
In case you guys want to discuss it on your.
Okay. Of everyone's behalf. Okay.
So that 15th through the 18th is open.
So you guys have, oh, sorry.
What about Wednesday the 16th?
Let me double check my.
Do you guys online hear me the 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th are all open?
I'm open all the
You can't do Tuesdays and Thursdays, so.
Okay.
That's just we can do Wednesday the 16th.
Okay.
Wednesday the 16th works for me.
I can make it work. So.
Okay, Wednesday the 16th at 7 or 6?
Let's do, what is 6 better? Because if right now, if we just started at 7, it would be 10 o'clock. I mean, if we would have started,
6 is good?
is 6 okay with you guys or no?
Yes. 6.
Wednesday the 16th at 6.
And since this is an official meeting, I'm also available.
Sorry, Mr. Houston. Oh, Mr. Wofsik, are you available on the 16th?
I am. Yeah.
Okay, good. So we will go ahead and put that on the calendar. Is he still on there? Mr. Richards, you are still on the call. If you are, I mean, if you would like to attend, by all means, you are welcome to attend. If there's any building updates or timeline updates, I think it would be beneficial for us between now and then, if that is something that happens. I don't know if it will with the holidays and everything, but I'm not sure if we necessarily need you at the next meeting unless you just really want to attend. Is that, I don't want to speak for everybody. Awesome. And Brenda, would you be available on that evening in case, I mean, there were several questions for you.
Yes.
Good. Thank you so much. We should have definitely checked that date with you because we've really been asking you a lot of questions. So, okay. Is there any other discussion about the JEDD before German Township continues with our meeting? We get to keep going. No, the other entities do not have to stay unless you just really want to see how German Township meetings work. You guys are like diehard people for German Township meetings. Feel free to exit, to leave. I appreciate your time, your 2 hours. So I think that's all the discussion we have about the JEDD. We're going to move along with our agenda if there's nothing else.
Mrs. Reed,
Yes.
let me open up the picture. Might I suggest we take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 9 o'clock?
Does any of this have to be done before our next township?
Yes. Mr. Stubbs' question is, does any of this have to be done before our next township meeting or can it wait? I'm going to answer that question and I hope I'm answering it correctly, Mr. Houston. I believe that the CARES funding and the farm vote has to be done. Is that correct, Mr. Houston?
Both of those have to be done.
I'm not sure about the tax collection.
No, that can wait, but that's a simple resolution, but it can wait till the 14th.
Okay. Well, I mean, if it's a matter of a couple minutes, I don't know if it's a make or break, but I am comfortable with, I have no problem going and running to the potty again real quick and giving everyone else a little break.
I think we can complete everything we need in less than a half an hour and hopefully 15, 20 minutes.
Okay. I'm hoping for 15, Mr. Houston.
Let's go.
Okay. All right. So we will reconvene in 3 minutes if everyone's okay with that. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and mute mine and take a little break.
All right, we are now live again.
All right, I have the time at 9:01 for us to resume our short break from our meeting and continue. I believe the first item, or the next item rather, on the agenda is the JEDD, or not the JEDD, we've already done that. We're not redoing that again today, is the CARES funding. I don't have that verbiage in front of me. So Mr. Houston, the CARES funding, I believe Mr. Raymer has worked hard to get us some quotes and some information that he shared with us. So Mr. Raymer, do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Jason, fill in covering everything, but we had the audio conferencing stuff we talked at our last township meeting. We decided to go with Spectrum. At the time, we thought it was a $500 flat fee that I thought I could negotiate a little bit. They did come back and they've waived the $500 flat fee. So it's actually a slight decrease in the monthly service agreement that we have with them, and we'll get upgraded equipment and audio conferencing. So I think that's a no-brainer. We'd already decided on that. But Mr. Heaston, you should have that contract from Spectrum now. So I don't know if we need to make a motion so you can sign that contract or anything, but the Spectrum thing should be put to bed at this point. Does that sound right, Mr. Heaston?
I don't think that we actually approved that plan at the last meeting. I don't recall that we had that approval.
I don't recall if we had a motion. I think both Mrs. Reed and Mr. Stubbs said they'll defer to me on that they were satisfied with the information that I gathered, but we may not have made a motion. So if we need to make a motion to move with Spectrum, I would introduce that motion at this point.
Very good. Is there a second to the motion?
I will second that. I really appreciate Mr. Raymer working so hard and getting that $500 fee waived. I'm sure that was not an easy task, so I appreciate that.
Sure.
So this is really not going to use any of our CARES money, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yes, that's true, which is good.
Very good. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. That took care of that one. That was easy.
Okay, now on the video conferencing, I had got in touch with several companies. Many did not have install dates and didn't even want to quote anything. Two of them did agree to make a quote for us just for equipment only, knowing they cannot install before year end. One of them is AVI SPL, which I think I forwarded everyone that quote maybe a week or so ago, and it had in there a large screen television, HDMI cord, a mount for the wall for the TV monitor, USB connection cord to go from a computer to a webcam and the webcam. That quote was $1,698.84. As I had mentioned in the email, I think we could do it slightly more efficiently if we just bought these individually. The only key thing that I didn't love was they quoted a 55-inch TV, and I think in our room we could definitely support a 70-inch TV for not much more money. It's not like we need a 4K Ultra HD TV. So I think for the same money we can get slightly better equipment. But I did go back and ask AVI if they could quote me just the camera, because Mr. Heaston, you may recall when we spoke with the person early on about the public address system, he said that a lot of people were buying the web cameras and selling them on eBay in a markup. So I don't know that that's something we could get personally. So I would suggest we at least get the camera equipment from them. We can get all the equipment from them with a slight increase in price versus what we could buy it by ourselves. But that's where the discussion, I think, should lay. The audio video concepts folks, they just came back yesterday and said they would give me a quote, but I still haven't got it. I don't think that they're going to beat AVI by any significant amount. And since they're dragging their feet, I would suggest we just make a decision on AVI SPL's quote. Like I said, there's two quotes. One's for all the equipment for roughly $1,700, although it has a slightly smaller display TV than I would have expected. They also did a second quote for the AVI SPL, just WebEx camera, and that's $568 by itself, and we would buy the other equipment, and then Jeremy or I would set it up in the township hall.
What I might suggest, Mr. Raymer, is that we have an open-ended resolution that specifies an amount not to exceed.
Yep.
And then to be determined whether it's all purchased from AVI or whether some of it is purchased from a different supplier. I
agree. I think 2,000 is more than sufficient, but that's where I would want Mr. Jake Stubbs, Mr. Stubbs, and Mrs. Reed to weigh in on whether they thought that was reasonable.
I think with that quote coming in right above 1,600, I would hate to make a resolution and then it not be enough. So it sounds like an okay number, 2,000, especially if you think that you can get the television cheaper. Now with that 1,600, did that include the web camera, Mr. Raymer?
Yeah, it included the web camera, the TV mount for the wall, and the 2 cords that we would need to have for the webcam and the display. Now, again, that included a wall mount, which he charged $190 for wall mount. I think that was pretty high. The other thing I was going to talk to you guys about is I actually think for 2 reasons it may be better for us to put it on a freestanding mount that we can move around the township hall. That way it's not mounted in a fixed location. It cuts down on the electrical work and the difficulty there. Plus, it allows us flexibility in the future on depending on someone else presenting or us presenting or WebEx or whatever we're using the monitor for. But that's a question that I want to get answered from you guys as well. I'm highly confident that Jeremy and I could mount it if you guys want it mounted on the wall. It's just a discussion.
My only fear, and I guess it's because I have 3 small children at home, that when there's a TV on a TV stand, it can easily get knocked over or broken, especially if we're wheeling it around different places of the room. I'm comfortable with it. I mean, hopefully there are only adults moving the television. But with the television that large on a stand, it being moved, especially from one side of the room to the other, I'm comfortable going either way. I just have some reservations about, and I don't know where you would wall mount it either. I don't know, but I do have some concerns about it being wheeled. If then the TV falls over as you're going to wheel it for a presentation, then we're really kind of hurting a little bit. So I don't know how Mr. Stubbs feels, but that's just, I don't know if that's just my reservation. I'm comfortable with either one.
Anybody opposed to just setting the TV on top of the giant safe? No, seriously, I think that we just set a TV on top of the giant safe.
Then do you wheel the giant safe around the room if you're going to move the television?
Oh, no, I mean, it just sits there. You can take it down if you need to move it, but its house is right there. It stays there. If there's a situation where we need to move it, it still has the base on it and we can put it wherever we so desire in this room, but right there.
So we would just need to make sure, Mr. Stubbs, that the feet of the television would fit on the top of the safe.
Correct.
Because otherwise that's just not going to work.
Well, I know there's ways to make it work. You put a broader, piece of wood across there that has wider for the feet. It could work. I think to that point, I think we get the equipment, get it approved, get the CARES Act equipment. And if we have to, out of the general fund, pay for a wall mount or a freestanding mount after year end, that's not the end of the world, maybe another $150. But what we can do is we can buy the camera, the HDMI, the USB cord, and the television now, and then we'll decide on a mount later if that's fine with you guys.
No, I'm fine with that. And even if I don't know if we want to get a wall mount or a TV stand, because my personal opinion, I don't think Walmart's Walmart's expensive. Wall mounts are not that expensive to go and buy if we would need to out of the general fund. So I'm comfortable just making a blanket $2,000 resolution to buy the necessary equipment for audio equipment. Yes.
Are you introducing a resolution, Mrs. Reed? If so, we'll use 2020-40 and we'll use 41 for the next one.
Mr. Raymer, did you have anything to add? You've really done all the work on this. I don't want to run away with your resolution at all.
No, I think that's the right thing to do. The only thing I would question is because I'm virtual, do I even have the ability to do it? Maybe it's best if you introduce it and you vote on it. Okay.
No, that makes sense. I actually forgot about that part. So I will introduce resolution 2020-40 to allow spending of up to $2,000 of CARES funding for audio equipment to update or to put into the township hall.
Is there a second to resolution 2020-40?
I'll second.
Any discussion of the resolution?
Yeah, I would just be clarified in the resolution. It's actually for the video, not the audio equipment. The audio is already taken care of.
Thank you. I apologize.
No worries.
And Mr. Raymond, you will not be voting. I assume you can abstain. I think that would be an allowable vote.
Okay.
If there's no further discussion, if we're ready to vote, Mrs. Reed,
Yes.
Mr. Stubbs,
Yes.
and Mr. Raymond.
I abstain.
Resolution 2020-40 is approved. I believe that covers everything under the CARES section tonight, unless I'm missing something.
That's all I had.
All right. Every year, we are offered the option, if we so choose to take it, to get advances on the taxes. Otherwise, we have to wait for a settlement. The February tax usually would be in May, and then the summer tax, if it stays at July or August, would be several months after that. But we're allowed to request an advance, and every year the township has done that and asked for monthly advances. And Mrs. Reed has the language that was used last year. We will use it again for this year, and this will be resolution 2020-41.
All right, I will introduce resolution 2020-41, a resolution authorizing the Montgomery County Auditor Office to advance the maximum available amounts of the real estate taxes, personal property taxes, estate taxes, and the fines on a monthly basis during 2021.
Is there a second to the resolution?
You're not.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion of resolution 2020-41? Okay, hearing none, I'll go ahead and call the roll. Mrs. Reed,
Yes.
Mr. Stubbs,
Yes.
and Mr. Raymond.
I abstain.
Resolution 2020-41 is adopted. And the last thing we have, and I sent you this information in the email, we received an official ballot for the, the Farm Service Agency, Preble Montgomery County Farm Service Agency Committee. And I guess the township as a member can vote for one of the two candidates. This needs to be submitted before December 7th, which is why we're doing it tonight. And the two candidates for this committee are Dwight Kaufman Jr. and Kenny Lucas.
So I have a question, I guess, real quick, Mr. Houston. Mr. Stubbs, can you mute? There's like a lot of, no, you're fine. Is this something that comes up yearly? I've just never, we've never voted on this before.
I truthfully don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
We voted in the past, or actually, I think we chose not to in the past.
Okay, because I just, okay.
There's multiple seats.
So I do not unfortunately know either of those gentlemen. I'm comfortable going either way, either. I don't know if anyone else has a strong feeling. I'm comfortable not submitting a vote. I hate to not be represented, but I also hate to vote for somebody that I don't know anything about. So I will kind of defer to Mr. Stubbs or Mr. Raymond if they have any insight.
I'll say that I spent about 30 minutes trying to find more information on the candidates, and I was unsuccessful. And I'm in the same boat. I don't feel, I can't even vote tonight anyways, but I guess my input is that I don't have a strong feeling towards either of the candidates based on lack of information I can find.
I don't know either one of them personally, but when I reached out to a Jackson Township representative, he said we couldn't go wrong either way. So I don't know. We can vote for one, and I can make that motion.
If you choose not to vote for anyone, that would be perfectly acceptable also, whatever you choose to do. Apparently in the past, Mr. Stokes, that is the position the trustees took.
Yeah,
I believe
I don't
so.
know either of them, so. Yeah. I'm sorry, I couldn't. Okay. So I'm comfortable with not voting for either one, as long as Mr. Raymer and Mr. Stubbs is comfortable with that as well.
I'm fine with that.
Same.
I don't think we need a motion to say we're not going to do anything, so we'll just let this one die on the vine. And I believe that takes care of everything we have in business tonight, Mrs. Reed.
You know, you almost made 15 minutes, Mr. Houston. It was very close. I think we're just 1 minute after.
I'm going to blame Mr. Raymer for that.
Okay. So, so I'm going to make a motion to adjourn at 9:17.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned at 9:17.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you all.